The vast universe harbors terrifying alien races, each capable of unleashing apocalyptic wars against humanity. To survive this brutal reality, mankind unlocked their genetic shackles, gaining unimaginable superhuman strength. Amidst endless cosmic slaughter, the fragile fate of the human race hangs by a bloody thread. Transmigrated into this perilous world 10 years ago, Long Aotin became a lowly butler for the mighty deciphered family. Facing the absolute annihilation of a dark matter bomb, he miraculously survived. Instead of turning into atomic dust, his genetic liberation rate mysteriously surged to 48%. In this universe, genetic liberation determines everything. Breaking past the mortal limits grants godlike abilities, allowing humans to shatter planets and traverse galaxies. The higher the percentage, the closer one gets to becoming an immortal entity capable of crushing mechanized fleets and devouring cosmic beasts. Waking up from the deadly blast, Long Aotin felt newfound power coursing through his veins. Taking command of a fresh squad of elite butlers, his eyes burned with fierce ambition. Could this miraculous evolution finally be the turning point to dominate this terrifying, bloodthirsty universe? Inside the grand courtyard of the deciphered family estate, 300 butlers dressed in black tailcoats stood in perfect formation. A cylindrical robot projected a holographic image detailing the imminent threat of the Freedom Restoration cult hiding in the impoverished district. They awaited their deadly orders. The cult leader possesses a 40% genetic liberation rate, the robot announced coldly. They have heavily armed fanatics preparing for an armed rebellion in the Yate district. The three leading butlers wearing red bow ties growled in unison, their eyes flashing with absolute murderous intent. Kill! The deafening roar of nearly 300 butlers echoed through the courtyard, shaking the very air. Their voices carried a chilling devotion to the deciphered family. Satisfied with their bloodthirsty morale, the leading commander nodded slowly and ordered the heavily armed squad to move out. 10 black hovercars descended upon the decaying streets of the Yate district. The sudden arrival of the deciphered family's executioners sent shockwaves through the impoverished crowds. Terrified pedestrians scattered like frightened birds, knowing that the presence of these ruthless butlers meant an impending bloody massacre. The neon-lit streets were filled with cheap technological marvels, but devoid of any natural greenery. Colorful autonomous street lamps floated toward the convoy, broadcasting annoying advertisements for lighting services. Long Aotin, wearing his signature red bow tie, coldly rejected the mechanical offers, his expression remaining completely stoic. Lighting a special cigar laced with stimulants, Long Aotin took a deep drag. The smoke calmed his nerves, though his heart remained heavy. He had transmigrated into this brutal world 10 years ago, constantly facing death. His grand ambitions had been thoroughly crushed by harsh reality. Humanity ruled a vast portion of the galaxy, yet they were surrounded by nightmarish enemies. The cosmic insectoids could devour any matter, while the mechanical races possessed terrifying terraforming capabilities. Giant space beasts and abyssal demons constantly threatened to wipe out human civilization without any mercy. Even within human society, countless fallen cultists willingly mutated into grotesque monsters. Thinking about these endless threats made Long Aotin's head throb with anxiety. He silently cursed his non-existent system, wondering how he had managed to survive a decade of constant torment in this hellish universe. "Boss, they stole our glory again. We're stuck guarding the rear," a skinny butler complained, carefully holding Long Aotin's cigar ash. Long Aotin merely adjusted his slicked back hair, his eyes reflecting a deep weariness. Surviving was his only priority. He had no desire for meaningless heroics. "Every mission wipes out a batch of our men. I just want to live," Long Aotin whispered, handing the cigar back. The skinny butler respectfully wrapped it in a white handkerchief. In the deciphered family, butlers were mere disposable property, their lives dictated by their masters. Suddenly, a massive explosion violently rocked the street crossing. Deafening blasts echoed continuously as scorching shockwaves knocked the ordinary guards off their feet. The terrified guards tried to flee, but the black-clad butlers blocked their path, acting as ruthless overseers ready to execute any cowardly deserters. "Have your men retreat," Long Aotin ordered the trembling guard captain, showing a rare trace of mercy. He quickly commanded his butlers to take defensive positions at the choke point. Within seconds, the highly trained squad formed an impenetrable line, strictly forbidding anyone from passing through. Pulling out thermal binoculars, Long Aotin peered through the thick smoke billowing 800 meters away. Intense flashes of gunfire and explosions illuminated the dust cloud. The fierce resistance completely contradicted their initial intelligence. This wasn't just a simple cult gathering, it was a deadly trap. Through the lens, he spotted nearly 100 cybernetically modified soldiers. These cheap lethal killing machines were armed with flamethrowers, chainswords, and tracking missiles. Heavily armored with alloy skeletons and liquid metal plating, they formed a terrifying mobile fortress, slowly advancing toward their defensive choke point. Cybernetic soldiers were mere insects compared to humans with a 100% genetic liberation rate. However, for someone like Long Aotian, whose liberation rate was only 36%, they posed a massive threat. He had risked his life countless times just to reach this current power level. He remembered his academy instructor, a powerful butler with a 73% liberation rate. Ordinary heavy artillery couldn't even scratch his skin. He was like a legendary superhero, completely immune to standard explosions and extreme temperatures. That was the true terror of high genetic liberation. The cult's cybernetic soldiers relentlessly pushed forward, shrugging off the attacks from two other butler companies. If they broke through the choke point, Long Aotian's squad would face severe punishment from the family. He couldn't afford to let these mechanical monstrosities get any closer to his position. Bring out the Stinger grenade launchers. Long Aotian commanded sharply. We cannot let them breach this line. The butler's eyes lit up as they retrieved the heavy weapons. These launchers were standard issue, perfectly designed for obliterating clustered enemies in brutal trench warfare and defensive sieges. Target locked, the squads reported in unison. Long Aotian raised his hand, his gaze turning icy cold. 4-round burst mode. Focus fire on the cult's defensive line. Attack. In an instant, a terrifying barrage of high-explosive grenades rained down upon the advancing cybernetic soldiers, creating absolute chaos. Explosions chained together, engulfing the cult's vanguard in a raging sea of fire. Long Aotian raised his thermal binoculars to inspect the carnage. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light pierced through the smoke, expanding rapidly. Wherever the light touched, the thick dust completely vanished into nothingness. A primal terror gripped Long Aotian's heart. Every hair on his body stood on end as the undeniable aura of death washed over him. Run! He screamed, his muscles bulging as he desperately turned toward the hovercars. It was the dreaded annihilation light, a dark matter weapon. A dark matter bomb the size of a sesame seed could create an absolute dead zone 1,000 meters wide. Anything caught within its radius would be instantly disintegrated at the atomic level. Long Aotian was 856 meters away from the deadly epicenter. He needed to cover over 140 meters instantly to survive. But the speed of light was absolute. The moment he saw the blinding flash, his fate was already sealed. No, I refuse to die here, he roared internally, pushing his body beyond its limits. As a superhuman with a 36% liberation rate, he dashed an incredible 150 meters in half a second. But before he could even exhale, his consciousness faded into darkness. He collapsed heavily onto the ground, gray dust drifting from his disintegrating uniform. 3 days later, deep underground in the Dacre family's biological research facility, a middle-aged butler bowed respectfully to a woman dressed in a pristine white coat. Miss, this is Long Aotian, the only secondary butler who miraculously survived the annihilation light, he reported with absolute reverence. The other butlers were completely atomized, but his genetic liberation rate inexplicably jumped to 48%, the middle-aged man continued. The brilliant woman Isabel casually tapped the air, bringing up a holographic interface. She meticulously reviewed Long Aotian's vital signs, searching for any hidden anomalies or mutations. Fascinating. Truly fascinating, Isabel murmured. Every single metric of his body was perfectly normal. Surviving a dark matter explosion was impossible enough, but emerging completely unharmed was the greatest anomaly of all. Her eyes gleamed with the ruthless, cold curiosity of a top-tier genetic researcher. Over the past 3 days, we conducted over 1,000 experiments using other butlers, the middle-aged man reported nervously. None survived the simulated annihilation light. They were all atomized within a single second. The process consumed a massive amount of our precious dark matter reserves. Isabel frowned, her beautiful face showing absolute disdain. At just 12 years old, she had broken the mortal limit, becoming a superhuman with over 100% liberation rate. Now an elite researcher, she viewed the lives of ordinary butlers as nothing more than disposable experimental materials. My father is too merciful, caring about the complaints of useless parasites, Isabel scoffed coldly. Increase the experiments to 3,000 subjects. I want the new data by tomorrow. She glanced at Long Aotian floating in the stasis pod, completely indifferent to the massive loss of life. Release him back to work. The Dacre family does not feed useless idlers, Isabel ordered, turning on her heel. And bring me the files on that freedom restoration cult. The middle-aged butler bowed deeply, silently pitying the thousands of men who would soon die for her curiosity. Half an hour later, the anesthetic supply to the stasis pod was completely cut off. Long Aotian slowly regained consciousness, his mind foggy and disoriented. Blinking at the sterile environment, he realized he was floating in a medical tank. I'm not dead, he thought in utter disbelief. I actually survived a direct hit from a dark matter bomb. Wild excitement surged through his chest. Could it be? Has my long-awaited system finally arrived to save me? Overwhelmed by sheer joy, he mentally screamed for the system, desperately hoping for a miraculous golden finger. The medical monitors immediately blared with loud warning sirens. A panicked researcher grabbed a microphone. Butler Long Aotian, please control your emotions. Your body hasn't fully stabilized. Before long, Aotin could even comprehend the warning. His entire muscular system seized up in agonizing, uncontrollable violent spasms. Pain. So much pain. Long Aotin gasped as he curled into a tight ball. The medical staff frantically fished him out of the tank, injecting him with powerful soothing agents and heavy nutrients. Slowly, the excruciating cramps subsided, leaving him gasping heavily on the cold floor. After dressing in a fresh black tailcoat, Long Aotin stood before a mirror. He carefully slicked back his wet hair, ensuring not a single strand was out of place. A man might be weak, but he must always remain elegant, he muttered, admiring his own sharp reflection. Are you sure I'm completely fine? Long Aotin asked the head doctor suspiciously. Absolutely. We've monitored you for 3 days. You are perfectly healthy, the doctor smiled widely. Now go back to your post and continue serving the great Dacre family with absolute unwavering loyalty. My life belongs to the master. Long Aotin's body instinctively snapped to attention, his right fist violently striking his chest in the standard butler salute. The doctor nodded in deep satisfaction, pleased to see that the terrifying explosion hadn't damaged the servant's deeply ingrained psychological conditioning. Arriving at the secondary butler administration office, Long Aotin approached the front desk. I need to requisition standard combat gear, he told the female clerk. Also, my entire squad was wiped out. Do I still have any pending missions scheduled for today, he asked casually. The female clerk tapped her holographic keyboard, her eyes widening as she noticed his 3-day absence. She was about to reprimand him severely when her gaze fell upon his updated stats. 48% genetic liberation. She gasped sharply, her strict demeanor instantly shattering into pure awe. A 48% liberation rate was incredibly rare among secondary butlers. He was just a tiny step away from becoming an elite primary butler. Believing he had been on a highly classified secret mission, the clerk immediately bowed her head, showing the utmost respect to a superior powerhouse. I apologize, sir. Your equipment will be ready at Windows 7 in exactly 3 minutes, she said respectfully. Since your squad is gone, you are off duty today. New recruits will be assigned to you tomorrow morning. Please remain in your quarters until further notice. Long Aotin silently observed her sudden shift in attitude. Power truly changes everything in this world, he thought, marveling at his unexpected evolution. He elegantly swept his hair back and confidently walked toward the armory, thoroughly enjoying the newfound respect and fear he commanded from others. Returning to his spacious private quarters, Long Aotin received a mandatory video call. A senior butler's holographic projection appeared in the center of the room. The man glanced around the luxurious apartment before nodding approvingly. Mission accomplished flawlessly. Your merit points will be updated shortly, he announced. The administration is aware of your 3-day absence, so no disciplinary action will be taken. The senior butler continued smoothly. Welcome back to the ranks. Continue serving the great Dacre family. Long Aotin immediately struck his chest, shouting the mandatory pledge of absolute loyalty with practiced enthusiasm. After the call ended, Long Aotin let out a long sigh of relief. He stripped off his uniform and enjoyed a long hot shower. Lying spread eagle on his massive bed, he closed his eyes and tried to sense the miraculous changes hidden deep within his own body. Despite his intense focus, he couldn't detect any abnormalities or hidden systems. Maybe the doctors were right. I'm just incredibly lucky, he murmured sleepily. If he truly possessed some mysterious mutation, that terrifying female researcher would have definitely sliced him open for endless agonizing experiments. The next morning, Long Aotin arrived at the designated assembly point to receive his new squad. 99 fresh butlers stood in perfect formation awaiting his command. Sir, I am. One recruit began to introduce himself, but Long Aotin immediately raised a hand, cutting him off completely. Sweeping his gaze across the highly trained men, Long Aotin slicked back his hair with deliberate slowness. I don't have many rules in my squad, he declared, his voice echoing in the silent hall. The only rule here is that my word is absolute law. Understood? Understood, sir. The 99 men roared in perfect unison. Long Aotin raised a single finger, a faint smirk playing on his lips. First rule, he said smoothly. Never call me sir. From now on you will address me as your boss. Am I making myself clear? Yes, boss. The men shouted back, their voices filled with absolute submission. Long Aotin nodded in deep satisfaction. In this incredibly dangerous universe, without a magical system to protect him, he needed absolute control over his subordinates. Establishing his own absolute authority was the first crucial step. He noticed that 5 of the new recruits were elite secondary butlers, boasting solid 31% liberation rates. This new squad was significantly stronger than his last one. With these capable meat shields under his command, his chances of surviving the next deadly mission had just dramatically increased. Long Aotin, by virtue of his privileges, had already reviewed the newly augmented steward dossiers through the 3-dimensional tactile audiovisual network. 5 level 2 stewards had only just elevated their gene liberation rates and were considered freshly promoted. Regulations stipulated that once a steward's gene liberation exceeded 41%, the squad would seldom contain a solitary level 2 steward, or multiple such stewards would be allocated according to operational needs. Where a level 1 steward led, it was not uncommon to find a dozen 20 or even 30 or 40 level 2 stewards under command. Greater leadership strength invariably invited assignments of increased peril. They departed the steward barracks in the issued black Suzuki-style hovercars, a compact fleet, heading resolutely toward the designated mission site. This assignment was again tied to the enigmatic Zizei Fukuojiao. Unknown to Long Aotian, at that moment Yishibayer had turned her attention toward the cult upon returning from the Institute. During that same day, the Deciphered had mounted an extensive purge of Zizei Fukuojiao operatives within and around the lordly estate. Muyachu was a priority sweep zone and the destination for Long Aotian's contingent. The steward convoy diverged from another team also assigned to Muyachu and arrived at Farm Z756. Their arrival dispersed the agrarian workers in an instant. Long Aotian glanced up at the gate plaque bearing Z756, and an uneasy sensation subtle at first swelled within him. When he had accepted the mission, the foreboding had been faint as standing before the target had intensified and would not be shaken off. It was the sort of disquiet that insists on its presence, like a whisper telling you the door might be unlocked despite every certainty that it is not. Jin Shengzayame at his side inquired softly whether he perceived danger. The newer level 2 stewards lacked Long Aotian's seasoned instincts. He ordered a multifunctional case produced and the deployment of an X-shaped surface satellite. The hovercars were set to support mode. The satellite ascended like a nimble drone as he instructed thermal scanning and then activated metal resonance sensing. The initial scan reported no overt anomalies, yet the metal sensing readouts revealed that beneath the farmland lay an 18-kilometer network of buried matrix defense emitters supplemented by 810 self-defense quad turrets that the farm owner had installed. These, however, were not the only surprises. The matrix itself comprised an assembly of heat melt ray projectors. Long Aotian queried whether the system's control protocols were still under their jurisdiction. Jin Shengzayame confessed they required authorization from the Level 2 Steward Division and set to work invoking the necessary permissions with deft fingers upon a malleable metal control slate. While she worked, Long Aotian allowed himself the small indulgence of composure. A cigar appeared between his fingers, ignited, and he inhaled and exhaled with a languid elegance that seemed to restore equilibrium. Around him the stewards held their positions vigilant and austere. Only Jin Shengzayame's efficiency and confidence warmed his approval. With a faint smile of validation, Long Aotian instructed the matrix to neutralize the 810 turrets. The subterranean emitters surfaced under red beams, and in an instant a concentrated burst of thermal energy obliterated every defensive turret. Jin Shengzayame, delighted at revealing arcane knowledge, explained with a touch of pride that the farm's buried defenses varied in grade and price, and that the matrix consisted of concatenated heat melt ray projectors, a versatile weaponry that resisted mirror reflection and could deliver both single-shot thermal strikes and sustained melt beam barrages. The revelation earned her the professional deference of those stewards who had not time to cultivate such technical trivia. When the heat melt barrage concluded, the central building lay shredded, devoid of intact walls, a rubble-strewn ruin cleaved by thermal lances. Long Aotian ordered the squad to split into 2 pairs of detachments. One would render aid to any survivors, tenderly securing them for transport back to the Steward Division for interrogation. The other would sweep the wreckage to ascertain how Zizei Fukuojiao had established such a clandestine presence within the estate. He entrusted those teams to Jin Shengzayame and Mile. The 2 named stewards accepted eagerly. Their ambitions were plain, each seeking higher station. Mile in particular harbored designs upon becoming vice leader of the squad, and he watched Jin Shengzayame with a mixture of rivalry and calculation. Lan Wang lunged forward with a contemptuous snort. He advanced rather than retreating, his blue robes blurred into a streak of cerulean light as he stamped his feet and vanished across 1,000 meters in an instant. The elite vanguard of the Declay household, the first-rank Steward Blade Squad, found their surprise assault rendered futile. Panic rippled through their ranks as they spun to face the sudden threat. Appearing before Aodai, Lan Wang raised his fist with lethal intent. Aodai's eyes widened as though the blow drew him like a magnet. He found himself unable to dodge and felt an irrational impulse to collide headlong into the attack. Terror flooded his mind. If that fist struck true, he would die. Hands clasped over his head, Aodai's cane radiated electric light. In a metamorphosis that astonished the onlookers, the staff liquefied into a shimmering orb of adaptive metal. Lan Wang's punch drove into that liquid shell and unleashed concentric ripples of force that rolled over his fist but failed to penetrate. Instead, the energy rebounded and cascaded back upon Lan Wang himself. Intrigued, Lan Wang glimpsed the right hand's metal transition from liquid to vapor, transforming into serrated white gusts designed to shear tendon from bone. He had underestimated the Declay lineage. With a backward flick of his hand, he did not pause his momentum driving forward, as if to plow through and escape in a single surge. The white wind blades collided with the returning steward vanguard. Flesh-tearing sounds echoed as the blades sliced through bodies. When their momentum dissipated, 60 first-rank stewards lay dead. Aedai, cradled by the waning liquid shell, stared with fury. Blood seeped from his 7 orifices. The liquid sphere could not be sustained and collapsed back into the cane. Had Lan Wang intended to kill him in that moment, Aedai would have perished. Lan Wang tore through the stewards as if he were an incarnate god of slaughter. Each punch sent a dozen lives spinning into the void, each fall accompanied by a bloom of brilliant sparks. The weapons in the steward's hands, vibration blades that could cleave iron like soft clay, high-yield kinetic rifles, defensive mecha that could withstand grenade salvos, suddenly seemed impotent. Blades bent away, mecha shattered at a touch, kinetic rounds detonated prematurely. Within 30 seconds, the Day-Clay household's 10,000-strong first-rank stewards were breached. A corridor of blood marked the path of devastation. Lan Wang glanced back from 2,000 meters and allowed himself a derisive mental scoff at such weapons. From his waist, he withdrew a spherical device. Aedai recognized it immediately, and with a shout shoved away a steward and fled. The object was a magnetic field inverter, a single-use doomsday capable of reversing the planetary magnetic field within a 1,000-meter radius in 3 seconds, an utter trump card. A low hum tore through the sky. In the first second, missiles and energy rounds buckled into spontaneous detonations, coherent beams warped into chaotic serpentine paths. In the second, the ground beneath Lan Wang detonated upward like an explosive exhalation. Surrounding soil and terrain rushed toward the newly vacated space, as if the world itself were breathing. In the third, bizarre blue currents and flame-like phenomena erupted across the steward ranks. Some convulsed as flame consumed them, others were grasped by invisible hands as air constricted around their throats, and electric azure tendrils leapt from the earth, bringing wails and ruin to any they touched. Aedai, aghast, saw the cobalt arcs bounding toward him and screamed for his comrades to shield him. Then, like a vision from the horizon, a figure in white descended. She appeared over Aedai and pressed lightly upon the earth. A giant palm-shaped depression formed where she had touched, and the blue arcs vanished as if they had never been. Lan Wang hovered on blue-plumed flight boots as the 3 seconds elapsed. He found himself unnerved. His adversary's eyes widened with surprise as she regarded him. The white-clad savior was none other than Day-Clay's first heir, Yishebayer. Aedai straightened and saluted with filial reverence. The surviving stewards bowed as well and addressed her with honor. Yishebayer offered Aedai measured praise for delaying Lan Wang long enough. She permitted the stewards to withdraw, commanding that they search for any and all transfer links and possible caches of material or artifacts. Lan Wang's genetic chain had shattered under her assault, and he was now fatally compromised. They must secure the Mofang before he could conceal it. With that, she vanished as silently as she had arrived, her vaporing presence leaving only a dispersed cloak of mist. Lan Wang laughed, then contemptuous and dangerous. He produced a slender black needle no longer than 15 centimeters, his true confidence. The instrument, crafted of 3-gram stone and called the heavy needle, accumulated kinetic energy as it flew, becoming faster and more lethal. At peak, it could reach 1,000 meters per second and mass at terrifying extremes. In close quarters against those whose Jian Jifangle reached 100%, the strike would be fatal. He unleashed the needle, and an audible shock ring raced toward Yishebayer. The projectile tore through the air and then halted a mere meter from her. Air around its shaft twisted and blurred, making observation difficult. Mist rose around Yishebayer, and within that veil innumerable motes seemed to dance. Tiny beads formed upon the needle's surface and coalesced into a single water orb that floated within the fog. The fog cradled the droplet, and the droplet bore up the needle, a spectacle that defied physical law. At Z756, Farm Long Aoshin's communication unit crackled to life. Jinchinj Xiaomei's voice reported the detection of a transfer link. Long Aoshin rushed to the location where his men guarded the node. As they watched, the node's receiving frequency climbed, and a stream of light atoms converged into a human shape. When the shimmer resolved, Lan Wang materialized among them again, ragged and enraged. Without hesitation, he struck with deadly suction-infused blows that obliterated the 50 stewards on the scene. There was no time for them to shriek before they shattered like firework carcasses. Long Aoshin cursed his luck and braced for a fatality. A powerful punch from Lan Wang struck his abdomen and drew blood, yet to both men's astonishment, Long Aoshin did not explode. Lan Wang seized him by the throat and hoisted him into the air, baffled by some inexplicable quality in Long Aoshin. Despite his scrutiny, nothing overt revealed the secret. Before Long Aoshin could respond, he choked as blood surged into his throat. A miraculous sequence then unfolded. The Mofang hidden within Lan Wang's chest floated forth and plunged into Long Aoshin's brain. Lan Wang reeled as his strength ebbed, and his muscular bulk visibly shrank. The device's arcane influence prevented Lan Wang from perishing ignominiously, but the balance now tipped away from him. Collapsing to the earth, he groped for a sensory storage chip and a razor-sharp tactical dagger from a ruined belt. He extracted a golden, irregular stone the size of an egg by slicing into his own abdomen. With a breathless plea for vengeance if he should die, he pressed the stone into Long Aoshan's wound and stabbed toward his own heart, blood spilling forth. Above the territory of Declay, within the geomagnetic layer that clasps the planet, several magnetic orbital stations hung like sentinels. These stations served as strategic hubs for the rapid deployment of combat units. When the command reached the station overseeing Muya Chu, it instantaneously launched 10 personnel capsules toward Z-756 farm. Each capsule bore 21st Steward officers, 200 in total, plummeting from nearly 6,000 kilometers with terrifying velocity. They would reach Z-756 farm in 13 minutes. On a mountain summit, Yishibae stood upon a windswept pine, gazing down over an expanse of forest. To her, transgressions of rank were trivial, the cultivation of her inner mirror was paramount. She was interrupted by an emergency communication. In the midst of refining her mind's mirror, she inquired calmly, "How did Lan Wang die?" Inside one of the laboratories of Yuji Guanjia, Bulong Aotian lay stripped and fastened to an examination table as an advanced biometric magnetic resonance scan swept over him. The sensory storage that had contained Lan Wang's testimony had informed him that contemporary scanning devices could not detect the Mofang nor the peculiar Jian Yuan Kuai embedded within his body. Nevertheless, dread tightened around his heart. The Declay family wielded formidable power. He feared that they might possess methods sensitive enough to reveal the Mofang lodged within his mind or the gene block in his abdomen. If that were to happen, not even divine intervention could save him. While immobilized, Long Aotian's memory replayed Lan Wang's hoarse explanations. Lan Wang had claimed that the Mofang and the Jian Yuan Kuai had been retrieved from an ancient stellar ruin, and that their origins were shrouded in mystery. He spoke of a legendary caste called the Gongqinshi engineers who had diversified life across the cosmos and left artifacts that dyed the darkness of the universe with color. The Mofang, an artifact of extraordinary utility, had altered the trajectory of Lan Wang's own martial path. It would select an optimal specialization for its bearer. Lan Wang had been a blade practitioner. Under the Mofang's guidance, he had abandoned the sword and adopted a magnetically infused fist technique, increasing his combat prowess threefold even by practicing only the basics. Lan Wang had also recounted that the Mofang optimized the body's gene energy expenditure. At the edge of death, when his musculature withered and his form resembled a desiccated husk, the Mofang had preserved him with the durability of an iron tower. It orchestrated cellular division with immaculate timing so that every flicker of energy focused upon the edge of survival. The third and perhaps most disquieting attribute was concealment. To validate this, Lan Wang had infiltrated one of the foremost institutions, Shengming Zhongzhen, where Yishibae herself had once studied. He had been reckless enough to undergo repeated scans. Those who hunted artifacts deduced his possession of a treasure, and agents had traced his path. The Mofang's hidden function had enabled him to elude discovery. Reading the reassignment, Long Aotian froze. "Surely there has been a mistake," he protested aloud. The matron steward before the information console fixed him with a stern look and warned him to choose his words carefully, threatening to note his disrespect in his record. Flustered, he explained that his prior experience lay in external duties. He had not trained for intimate domestic service and feared he might fail Miss Yishibae. To Long Aotian's trepidation, Yishibae's prowess was such that even titans had been undone by her power, rendering their genes fractured and lifeless. If she glimpsed even the smallest secret within him, his fate would be annihilation, his body dissected for study. Seated in his cabin, Long Aotian studied the fragmentary dossiers on these entities. The ship's briefing was mercifully concise. Each entry amounted to scarcely 100 words, yet the material proved hazardous. A broadcast interrupted his perusal. 2 Xingmeng soldiers in sealed protective suits entered and removed the papers to a containment locker of the highest filtration standard. "You are cleared to move freely, second rank steward Long Aotian," one of them said before departing with the secured crate. The proclamation folded into the room like a banner unfurling. The Bai Fa Lao Guanjia admonished the assembly to honor Yishibae's trust with unwavering fidelity to the Declay Jiazu. In unison, the Guanjia answered with a stentorian cry of fealty. Before disembarkation began, Long Aotian's uniform had been exchanged for e.g. Guanjia regalia. His privileges were advanced to the echelon befitting a department chief. The Bai Fa Lao Guanjia, who had long supervised Yishibae's household, offered him a few terse words of encouragement and released him. Long Aotian departed the cabin with a heart that fluttered between triumph and dread. As long as Yishibae accepted his account and the Mofang and Jian Yuan Kuai remained concealed, the future might yet be navigable. Back in his cabin, exhaustion and the lift of a suppressed tension sent Long Aotin into a profound sleep. The voyage continued at light speed for 5 hours without incident. At last, the near-orbit warship descended upon Gongxing Tiankai-Xing, touching down at the berth designated by the Shengming Zongzhen. Awaiting flotilla of conveyances, sleek suspended trains, received the Declay household Guanjia. Yishebayer rode ahead in her own car. Long Aotin and his peers, their eyes wide and unpracticed, peered out of the cabin windows and watched the world unfold. Within the protective precincts of the Shengming Zongzhen, both sky and subsurface were sealed no-fly zones. The absence of chaotic hover tracks and scattered landing pads allowed vistas to remain unmarred. Instead, one saw a panorama of architectural wonders. Spires pierced the clouds, glass and alloy forming elegant obelisks. Palaces hung in vapor, like islands afloat upon a misty sea. Immense engineered water screens caught sunlight and threw rainbows into the air, through which exotic avifauna traced sinuous trajectories. Each edifice presented a different face of ingenuity, grand, dazzling, harmonious, the result of a consummate synthesis between nature and technology. The scene struck like revelation, as if the world had been polished until its beauty became almost unbearable. Long Aotin let the splendor fill him, a counterpoint to the clandestine fear that curled at his heart. The Shengming Zongzhen's protections, its rituals of inspection, and Yishebayer's scrutiny would all form the crucible through which his secret must pass. For now, he allowed himself the small luxury of wonder. Tomorrow, he would bend every resource to ensuring that neither Mo Fang nor Jian Yuankuai betrayed him. For tonight, beneath the glowing spires and the suspended rainbows, he slept again. This time with the fragile comfort of newly won rank and the weighty responsibility of a department that would in future answer to his name. The unit's leader descended with swagger, flanked by crew who dismounted and removed their masks to reveal faces carved with contempt. They demanded to know why the Declay party had not notified the patrol division. The steward remained composed, asserting that they had already sought and received authorization from the first-tier security corps and therefore owed no report to the second-tier patrols. The patrol captain, his eyes hard as steel, struck the steward with a palm so fierce that the man was thrown unconscious. The captain sneered that although both claimed full Jian Jifeng Lu their rural power was ignorant of force, he ordered an immediate inspection, demanding that cargo and personal belongings be opened. Yishebayer listened, and then with deliberate poise accepted the protocol's premise while reshaping its consequences. She proposed to submit a written 50-character reflection to the dean's office, vowed to explain the incident in person to the head of security, and declared that the Declay family would be held financially responsible for any deaths among Unit 76669. The patrol captain's blood ran cold. He had expected either token punishment or a diplomatic rebuke. He had not anticipated an explicit death sentence, yet he could not reconcile how such a swift absolute penalty might be executed without igniting institutional backlash. Their helmets recorded every instant, broadcasting the encounter to the world. Without preamble, Yishebayer ascended effortlessly, her form ringed in a veil of mist. Fine beads of water coalesced into shimmering spheres, and those spheres braided themselves into a curtain of water that wrapped around her like a living halo. The platform's onlookers watched in suspended awe as she extended a finger. The aquatic veil surged into a titanic wave that obliterated the patrol captain in a single terrible stroke. One after another, the members of Unit 76669 were struck down so swiftly that resistance was impossible. When the deluge passed, not a soul of the 30 remained alive. The mechanical function Yulong, terror-stricken, circled helplessly, as if beseeching the very force that had felled their riders. Their proud posture collapsed. Had their anatomy allowed, they would have prostrated themselves upon the earth in homage. A towering wall of water descended upon the besieged mechanical function pterosaurs for less than half a minute. The deluge fragmented the sky and hammered down like a merciless judgment. From the horizon came another voice laden with volcanic fury. A man garbed in crimson strode forward, his countenance refined, yet furious, black hair threaded with red whipping about him. Each of his steps uprooted sand in boundless eddies. He spat accusations at Yishebayer, furious that those under his charge had been slain as if they were nothing. Zioxid paced with grim resolve, vowing in his heart that the woman who had committed this atrocity would pay dearly. Yishebayer answered with an exquisite calm that bordered on mockery. Her finger traced a languid arc, and a roiling annulus of water crashed down as if summoned by a conductor. The crushing tide pulverized 30 mechanical function pterosaurs without hesitation. Zioxid, incandescent with disbelief, rushed to intercede and formed clawed hands to summon protective barriers of sand that rose from beneath the dying machines. His walls were stout but utterly insufficient. The oceanic surge shattered them like brittle glass. The machines were annihilated, rendered beyond salvage. Before the confrontation could escalate, Zioxid's comlink was seized by an uncompromising command. A curt order demanded his return. Begrudgingly detained by duty, he cast a venomous glance at Yishebayer and retreated. Yishe brows knitted for an instant, as if contemplating some private regret. Whether she lamented the aborted contest of truth was known only to her. The Pingtai show roused itself and resumed its course. Yishe remained poised atop the platform's highest machine, solitary and contemplative, her white dress trailing like a relic of a gentler world and her tawny hair falling to her waist. Long Aotin watched enraptured, struck by a beauty that was not merely aesthetic but elegantly aloof. He admired her posture, her measured grace, and inwardly declared that her composure was the very essence of refinement. As he spoke, Hagen transmitted the summarized dossier into Long Aotin's comlink, leaving the butler to absorb the implications of power that redefined the very fabric of matter and being. As the crowd dispersed, Long Aotin's gaze collided briefly with two individuals. Ziguang, a first-class steward once destined to helm the BioBeast Research Division, with a gene liberation rate near 79%, seethed inwardly. Yishe had instead bestowed his former post upon Long Aotin, a junior steward, whose luck and brief acquaintance with her had supplanted Ziguang's prospects. Fearful to confront Yishe decree, Ziguang concealed his pique, yet resolved to inform Declay Ruger and Declay Kile of the affront constrained by his precarious standing. The department occupied the westernmost periphery of the sphere and comprised both an open-air precinct and an underwater facility. A defensive field shielded the aviary and paddocks, enclosing myriad exotic creatures, among them a resurrected breed called Fengshen Yulong. Subaqueous enclosures housed aquatic, amphibious, and triadic life forms. Long Aotin encountered a remarkable creature akin to an inflated octopus that could balloon itself into a sphere and ascend into the sky. Each of its 18 tentacles could inhale and exhale independently, and by compressing its internal gas, it could discharge an air shell, a concentrated projectile of devastating force. Its bodily fluids were caustic enough to dissolve the armored exoskeleton of a gargantuan flying prey. A singular horned tyrant exhaled a plume of white vapor from its nostrils, tore a blood-soaked chunk of flesh from the carcass beneath its feet, and swallowed it in 3 swift gulps. Long pursuit had frayed their nerves. Long Aotin reclined with the nonchalance of one accustomed to triumph, surveying the landscape with idle curiosity. Beside the cabinet stood a figure whose limbs were largely metallic prostheses. Even his hair comprised uniform metal tubes linking to his waist beneath a dark cloak. A red character marked his brow as well. He frowned as he observed the nanobot's emergency dispersal. / he murmured, scrolling code across the membranes of his eyes. Perhaps a near-orbit skiff had passed overhead and triggered the escape protocol. He regarded the sky with cool detachment. / fortunate those two / he pronounced. 3 days slipped past in the blink of an eye. Long Aotin and Shandian Wang rode back with taut nerves, arriving at the BioEast Research Division intact. After parting from Shandian Wang, Long Aotin returned to his quarters and, invoking his supervisory privileges, conducted a meticulous sweep of the room. Satisfied there was no threat, he eagerly submerged his consciousness into the inner recesses of his mind. He could detect faint writhing silhouettes upon the characters themselves, but nothing more concrete. The small revelation astonished him, yet afforded no practical leverage. Frustrated, he withdrew from his meditation. The novelty of the discovery left him jittery, and exhaustion accrued. He collapsed into bed and slept like the weary. He contacted Ha Jin and ordered a contingent of wild specimens, specifically with liberation rates between 51 and 60%. Within minutes, he stood in a vast combat chamber with Ha Jin at his side. He refused safety escorts. He believed only the extremity of life and death strife could shatter the gene lock. After clearing the room of all observers, he unlocked a recessed armory and selected a pair of super steel gauntlets. Other weapons, the overclocked blade, the 1000-fold hammer, the super steel sword, the energy cannon, were unnecessary. The magic cube's constraints had retargeted him to raw pugilism. The title of Swezi carried disproportionate prestige in the Institute's hierarchy, a trajectory that had once elevated Yishe herself from pupil to researcher and beyond. To be chosen would be to acquire an invaluable credential. How had Ha Jin learned of such intentions? In a private exchange within Long Aotin's quarters, Ha Jin spoke in halting whispers and hinted at inside intelligence. Long Aotin pressed him, sensing motives beneath the steward's smile, but Ha Jin offered only a knowing grin and silence. Unnerved yet intrigued, Long Aotin pondered the unseen strings at play and the enigmatic loyalties that might already be weaving around him. A crooked grin on Hagen's face made Long Aotin's fists itch with the impulse to strike, yet he preserved a stern composure. He asked coldly what information he was entitled to. Reporting Hagen never occurred to him. Whoever could place a spy so close to Miss Yishe must belong to an organization or individual of terrifying competence. He understood that as long as he was not yet formidable enough, the prudent course was temporary cooperation rather than open confrontation. Long Aotin examined the documents with astonishment. Such data were not unobtainable. Yishe privileges and position ought to suffice to procure comparable material. but institutional culture favored independent experimentation. Research bodies incentivized investigators to pursue hazardous trials and accrue original outcomes. Rewards typically improved gene liberation metrics. Consequently, even reticent researchers found their departments compelled to conduct experiments, and existing results were both permissible to redeem and not shunned for successful experiments denoted the resolution of numerous biological uncertainties. Long Aotian restrained his curiosity. He understood that pursuing truth without sufficient strength was tantamount to courting death. He observed the other stewards with a mask of indifference. Fortunately, their reactions were exaggerated enough that the earlier shock would likely go unnoticed. He did not stare too intently at Yishebayer, yet in the corner of her eyes, he almost perceived a contemplative glimmer. When she finished, Yishebayer addressed him by name and spoke with unmistakable approbation. Long Aotian bowed and replied respectfully. She commended his efforts and instructed the others to learn from the steward's diligence and, more importantly, from his courage. A faint smile eased her features as she admired those who continuously advanced their gene liberation rates. Without courage to face collapse or death, humanity had no future. She believed the strongest were forged by relentless resolve and a willingness to sacrifice. Gong Yushuan's farewell was graceful and unreadable. She never glanced at Hagen, whose face reddened with suppressed emotion betrayed discomfort. Long Aotian watched her go, and when she had gone asked Hagen whether he knew her and whether she might meddle in his affairs. Hagen hesitated, then warned quietly, "She is dangerous, be cautious." The enigmatic admonition stoked Long Aotian's ambition anew. As Hagen left briskly, he murmured to himself that life was becoming increasingly intriguing. Mounted upon the Shandian Wang, Long Aotian traversed the communal avenue at dizzying speed. Pingtai beasts and other creatures recoiled from the tempestuous passage. He admonished his mount to moderate its arcs of electricity. The spectacle might attract patrol formations. At the sight of approaching recon units, he stamped the Shandian Wang and commanded it to mask its discharge. The beast complied, suddenly subdued and guilelessly docile until the patrols passed overhead and their scanning filaments slid past them unnoticed. Once the danger faded, the Shandian Wang voiced its anxieties about being seized for dissection. On the horizon loomed a vast obsidian wall. A monolithic structure sprawled across the landscape like a mountain range. Rumor held that it concealed a colossal interstellar warship whose hull lay buried beneath the ground, leaving only a sliver of the bridge exposed. None had witnessed its ascent in millennia, and many dismissed the tale as fantasy, yet Long Aotian perceived more and more reason to believe the ship theory. He wondered why such a vessel would be constructed underground rather than in space, and whether other gargantuan edifices, like the gates of Shengming Zongzin, might also be dormant warships. The thought delighted him. He allowed himself a private nod at the triumph of a nascent insight, and chose for now to set aside the reasons behind it. Chu beneath blackened walls hummed with regulated motion. Hovering trains and an array of Pingtai shows stood aligned with mechanical precision. At every security gate, human tides swelled. Hundreds of thousands waited for entry, as if the very air had been saturated with anticipation. Rather than swagger into a welcoming circle or force himself upon hostile clusters, Long Aotian chose a quiet corner. The factions resumed their murmured stratagems. Nearby, a gilded youth with a golden cane sneered about the rising difficulty of the assessment, implying it had been tailored to chastise privileged ne'er-do-wells. He drew the ire of a silver-clad prince who responded with theatrical indignation and threats. In this fragment of human theater, monarchies persisted in many star nations. Pomp and pedigree still bought audacity. Long Aotian listened and felt a private satisfaction. Though uncertain of the creature's true nature, he deduced that the frequency modulation might not affect him. An artifact he possessed, the artifact cube, had earlier suffused his talents, constraining his aptitude to a different modality. Where others might be at a disadvantage, his preordained proficiencies were locked elsewhere. The creature's tuning, no matter how exquisite, could not surpass the cube's chosen signature. With a gene liberation rate of 61%, Long Aotian occupied a middling rank among these privileged offspring, but with the artifact cube and gene source shards in his possession, his prospects shimmered with potential. Long Aotian strode along a vast corridor lined with countless glass tanks in which liquids swayed and creatures floated like preserved dreams. Prehistoric lineages and contemporary species lay side by side, with unfamiliar synthetics, grotesque mutants, and even strange denizens from the starry void. Although each had been reduced to a specimen, the stubborn stirrings of life within those viscous vessels inspired a cold reverence in Long Aotian's chest. After nearly 1,000 meters of walking, he came upon a gallery where privileged heirs had gathered in their customary cliques. At the hall's very center, a floating elevator pierced the ceiling, its gate veiled in blood-red currents. Faces materialized in the streaming electricity, wailing, roaring, maniacal laughter rising in a chorus that filled the chamber. No one could guess what monstrous entity was imprisoned behind such a door. Silver-haired Bike Jiaoshu stood in the center smiling with an affability that barely concealed steel. He introduced the figure on his left as Yu Jiaoshu while intentionally neglecting the one to his right. He warned the gathered signs that the rear gate was no trivial passage. One misstep might mean conferring one's life to the hall. He offered those without courage a chance to withdraw. Yu Jiaoshu's impatience snapped. He derided any who sought to live by privilege rather than earn their place through trial. He commanded Jinli, the golden-clad scion of solid Di Xing's imperial line, to step forward first, urging him to uphold his family's dignity. Jinli accepted with regal poise, his golden brow and staff flashing as he boarded the floating elevator. On the observation dais, Long Aotin watched the alien life form with an expression of grave concentration. It rose almost 2 meters, a slender silhouette like a reed, and for all its length one could scarcely tell if it possessed internal organs. Its skin was as smooth and as white as parchment, its 20 fingers thin as chopsticks, and anatomy at odds with any natural taxonomy. The broader the smiles that played upon its face, the sharper the murderous intent that emanated from it, and the assembled spectators felt a mounting pressure tighten their chests. Without warning, amid a chorus of laughter, the Shaolin myriad launched its assault. Its right arm elongated in an instant and shot like a spear toward Jean Lai. There was the flash of a strike, and for a moment Jean Lai seemed bewildered. Had his golden staff not spontaneously transmuted into a shield, that elongated limb would have pierced his skull and ended him then and there. When exactly had the Shaolin myriad acquired such telescoping limbs? Could this be the effect of Shengming Taipan Gazeo life frequency modification? Might the royal armaments possess similar properties? The size of the shield amazed Long Aotian. The attack had been so swift his eyes had blurred, yet the golden staff's ability to reconfigure into protective form and save Jean Lai kindled a subtle envy in him. Power he thought was inextricable from utility. The initial strike having failed, the creature lashed out with both hands like whips. Each blow sought to pierce Jean Lai, as if to perforate flesh and bone. Waves of energy rippled outward from the tremendous lashes, shaking the protective field and threatening everyone nearby. The three professors watched with cold amusement. This exhibition of force did not faze them. Under the shelter of the golden shield, Jean Lai moved with practiced economy. Sensing an opening in the creature's assault, the convex center of the shield unfolded into a slender golden lance. Like a knight of ancient battlefields reborn in modern armor, he thrust with the spear. One strike shattered the shield-formed arm the creature had fashioned. Another, launched in rapid succession, was aimed at the head. It struck like a missile, obliterating the skull of the Shaolin myriad. Death did not render the creature impotent. In its final act, it drove a remaining limb past Jean Lai's frontal armor and aimed a lethal jab toward his heart. Jean Lai recoiled with a reflexive motion born of intuition. Had he not shifted his torso, even slightly, his heart would have been severed. Though spared that fate, he suffered grievous wounds. Blood poured from his mouth, and he leaned upon the lance for support, sweat beading across his brow. One professor, Bike, declared in detached praise that the creature's elimination merited an A grade for Jean Lai. Beside him, Wu De nodded in agreement. A green wave of light suddenly emanated from above Jean Lai's head, and the hand of the deceased, Shaolin myriad, was drawn outward from his body. At his feet, a metallic tendril rose needle-tipped and injected a viscous liquid into his wounds. Flesh knitted visibly as the fluid coursed through him, yet the strain of the treatment was evident in the dense perspiration on his forehead. Spectators from influential families watched with unease. They knew now that while Jean Lai relied on brute technique, there were technologies, like Shengming Taipan Gazeo, and these healing contrivances, that could turn the tide, and that thin, improbably built beings could endure far more than their form suggested. Long Aotian reflected that in an unexpected encounter his fist techniques might have overwhelmed such a fragile frame, but the specter of life frequency alteration remained troubling. Bo Luo, acting on the professor's instructions, stepped onto the arena and nonchalantly indicated a corpse, kicking the remains of the first creature back through the blood-red portal. A roar erupted from within as its kin perceived the slaughter. The electromagnetic gate vibrated and wavered with phantom shapes striving to erupt, yet it allowed only one Shaolin myriad to cross the threshold. From the portal emerged a man garbed in attire reminiscent of a cleric, armed with twin thermal beam pistols. He retreated swiftly as the contest commenced and dialed his weapons to full power, intending to unleash a devastating barrage on the creature, which stood motionless. He was, however, fractionally too slow. The Shaolin myriad's eyes flared, and it emitted a high-energy beam that drained his defensive module in an instant. The beam's heat demolished his skull in a brutal instant, a sight that drew gasps from the assembly. The trials continued, and another scion from a powerful house fell to the creatures. Bo Luo coolly urged the next candidate. A woman demurred, then several weaker-willed heirs chose to withdraw altogether. They had believed that failure would cost only limbs reparable by a medical module limbs that could regenerate with treatment. Death, they realized, yielded no restoration. Memories of the earlier fatalities, the vaporized skull, the body split asunder, paralyzed their courage. At their absence, the ring of contenders grew notably thinner. Roughly a third of the privileged successors left the platform, leaving a sparser field. Just as Boluo prepared to call another forward, a clear voice interposed. A blue-clad woman leapt onto the battlefield, extracting a powered sword at her hip with her right hand and closing her left around a cobalt fan. Boluo readied himself and supplied her pedigree at a glance. She was the Shinv of Shan Shui Wangwo Shueqiu. The Shaolian Maiwu Ren in front of her creaked audibly, its height shrinking from nearly 2 meters to about 1.75, and a faint cerulean tint washed through its once ivory skin. The change did not surprise the audience. This species had already been subjected repeatedly to Shengming Taipan. Now with the sacred maiden poised, the next chapter of the assessment unfurled. At the instant Boluo descended from the dais, Shui Shinu and the Shaolian Maiwu Ren struck simultaneously. Shui Shinu invoked an incantation of frost, her power blade suffusing with blue luminescence as the ambient temperature plummeted. The disparity in thermal gradients birthed a swirling mist of ice across the arena. In response, the Shaolian Maiwu Ren sprouted segments of azure ice armor, attempting to withstand the blade's ruthless arcs. Steel rang against ice as their weapons and blows interwove in a perilous exchange. The Shaolian Maiwu Ren's assaults often slid along Shui Shinu's skirt, as if savoring the caress of her fabric, yet each of Shui Shinu's strikes landed with unerring certainty. Were it not for the Xylean's crystalline plating, its organic form would have been pulverized long before. With an elegant, decisive motion, Shui Shinu executed the ice wheel slash. Her blade traced a fiendishly precise circle and severed the Shaolian Maiwu Ren's head from its torso in a single graceful sweep reminiscent of an immaculate waltz across frozen ice. The motion was so polished one might mistake it for slicing a cucumber rather than ending a formidable alien life. Professor Bike awarded the performance an A. A blood-red electromagnetic gate bellowed again and disgorged another Shaolian Maiwu Ren. Once its life frequency calibration completed, it lunged at Yin Wu without hesitation. Yin Wu, who had expected the same effortless grace Shui Shinu displayed, found himself forced to marshal every ounce of focus. The Xylean strikes left no room for complacency. After a grueling bruising bout that left Yin Wu battered, he finally shattered the creature's skull with a crushing hammer blow. Professor Bike rated his victory an A. Witnessing the combat set Long Aotian aflame with competitive fervor, he strode forward and declared his challenge without employing the flamboyant leap that marked the earlier challengers. His elegance took the form of measured composure. At his command, the cane he carried transmuted into a pair of gauntlets, an understated metamorphosis that announced his intent to fight with his fists. Boluo regarded him with curiosity. Long Aotian smiled and confessed with refined nonchalance that he relished the visceral contact of fist against flesh. The Shaolian Maiwu Ren emitted its startling laugh and became a white blur, its rapidity coalescing into a ghostly lance of motion. Fists like streaks of wind assailed Long Aotian. The onslaught left Long Aotian staggering. In the span of 2 heartbeats, he was pummeled with 32 blows, each impact like collision with a vehicle barreling at 120 kilometers per hour. Blood flared from his mouth, and his ribs sang with pain. Yet within the crucible of agony, something unexpected unfurled. The gene source implanted within his abdomen, far from serving solely as an unlocking talisman, activated a potent regenerative function. It healed wounds with the alacrity of a top-tier medical pod, and in the process fortified his tissues. Muscles knitting back, denser organs reinforced. Pain and restoration mingled into a perverse exhilaration. At first, the Shaolian Maiwu Ren faltered, baffled that its right side barrage had failed to fell him. It laughed and declared it was merely fatigued on one flank, the other still primed. Long Aotian spat a mouthful of blood and exploited the brief confusion. He unleashed his counteroffensive with uncompromising force. The arena hummed with kinetic resolve as human ingenuity and engineered mutation tested each other's limits. The crowd's whispers darkened into analysis. At a discreet table in a corner of the Wangwo, Hui, a small coterie, watched intently. Jean Lai leaned forward and asked quietly whether Long Aotian could prevail. Shueqiu shook her head with measured pessimism. Yin Wu, however, watched with shining eyes. He harbored an appetite for such raw combat and had trained in hammer techniques to savor that precise sensation of impact. Even among the observers, opinions diverged as the contest stretched on. The duel assumed a savage rhythm. Over 10 minutes, Shaolian Maiwu Ren's physiology began to betray him. The frantic overuse of his flash fist technique induced a systemic stress response, and his muscle hardness plummeted. Seizing the opening, Long Aotian seized the creature by the throat with his left hand and delivered a thunderous right hook to the swollen cheek. Each punch that followed unclenched a tension Long Aotian had carried since his own recent suffering. A vindication poured out in blows. The creature's skin cracked as the punches descended, fissures racing across its skull like fractures in crystal. With a low roar, Long Aotian delivered the final blow. The creature's head shattered, as if comprised of glass. The arena fell into a stunned silence that was swiftly replaced by astonished exclamations. An extraordinary adversary had been exhausted and felled by sheer persistence. No killed by the relentlessness of hand-to-hand assault. Long Aotian earned an A rating for his victory. The faces in the audience registered a mixture of awe and alarm. Behind them, the scions of great houses that hovered about the platform regarded him as one regards an unexpected anomaly. The examiners, eager to compress the evaluation, activated 9 combat platforms at once and drastically abbreviated the trials. Of the more than 2,000 privileged scions who had bypassed ordinary admissions, fewer than 500 vanquished the alien life forms and were accepted by Shengming Zongzin as protégés. Boluo clapped his hands to reclaim the arena for the next cohort of nepotistic entrants and spoke with deliberate severity, instructing those guided by the holographic beacons to depart in orderly fashion and warning that their families would be unable to bear the consequences of disorder. His measured admonition forestalled any ill-considered attempt to flout the results. Shueqiu, amused and contemplative, toyed with her own allocation and acknowledged Shengming Zongzin's mastery of modular design. With inexhaustible resources and an abundance of master practitioners as a safety net, the center could pursue reckless experimentation and iterate without fear of debilitating failure. Jean Lai, for his part, reconfigured his shape-shifting weapon into a favored spear. Long Aotian listened in quiet reserve, aware of his own relative stature and the staggering cost of the experiments that produced such artifacts, luxuries beyond the reach of lesser houses. In a measured procession of steps, the program executed itself to completion. Within less than half an hour, the 12-story residence had been erected in immaculate silence. The craft's artificial voice resumed transmission, its tone bright and officious. Honored student, would you care for a steward? Male or female, young or old, plump or slight, short or tall, attractive and capable? Long Aotian cut it off without ceremony. Stop. I do not require one. You may withdraw. A faint trace of disappointment threaded the reply. The voice conceded, very well, honored student, and fell away into the ship's hum. Settling into a comfortable sofa, Long Aotian methodically activated the issued standard gear. The nanoweave combat suit unfurled and reformed from the butler uniform he had been wearing, a perfect instantaneous transmutation. Its hue was softer than that of liquid armor, lacking the brazen glare of bare metal. It fell over him like woven silk rather than a slab of iron. The ceramic steel technology alone would be beyond the reach of many powers, yet this suit was the standard kit for Shengming Zongzin Yanjiuan students. He turned his attention to the knowledge chips. Since his training quota permitted only hand-to-hand systems, he ignored the other combat disciplines. Pressing a chip that stored fist techniques to the back of his hand, he felt a flood of schematic instruction enter his mind. Knowledge in itself was no substitute for practice. The chip spared a teacher's verbalization by imprinting principles directly, but without repetition and embodied memory, the information remained inert. It was like seeing something in the mind that seemed simple until the hands and feet were asked to perform. Earlier clashes with alien life forms, combined with the catalytic influence of gene source units, had driven his bodily activation toward a peak. Then, in the abandon of synchronized mental and physical training, the genetic lock had unwound further. The practice had not only honed technique, but had coaxed deeper biological potential into expression. Elated, Long Aotian shifted his attention to Cannon Fist. The teaching projection changed to a slender, frail-looking master whose punches nevertheless launched like ordnance. Each strike spoke of propulsion and inevitability, raw kinetic authority concentrated into a human limb. The communicator's permission upgrade peeled back layers of secrecy. Information that had previously been veiled now unfolded before Long Aotian's eyes, transforming his comprehension of the cosmos. The device bore not only news bulletins, but a living map of the galaxy, an atlas that delineated human star states, the loci of research institutions, theaters of conflict with other races, disputed systems, and regions deemed perilous or obscure. Other organizations: Nia, Yanjian, the Mechanics Faith, the Fund Concord, the Judicial Council, the Cosmic Planning Bureau, the Star System Coordination Department, Human Heavy Industries, and the like, were listed without rank, leaving Long Aotian uncertain of their relative strengths. He suspected that Shengming Zongzin's reticence had purpose, though every datum the center released bore nuance, and perhaps the omission of explicit hierarchies was deliberate. The washroom bore none of the nostalgic rituals of his former life. Clothing, including his nanosuit, possessed self-cleaning properties, materials resisted oils and dust by design. The bathing sequence could be as brief as 15 seconds. Convergent photonic beams traced his body, stripping dead skin and microbial detritus from the interstices. In the final instance, a fine misting applicator released a viscous, self-purifying disinfectant that encapsulated and sealed the surface. Those who preferred tactile immersion could step into a water chamber and let the photons and fluid do the work. During the ritual, the nanosuit contracted to a single point at the brow and reconstituted itself once the process concluded. A food replicator in essence resembles a three-dimensional fabrication apparatus. Its feedstock comprises muscular fibers, vegetal strands, micronutrients, and biostimulants. The cuisine is reduced to an atomized state and then reconstructed by the machine, emerging as consummate dishes indistinguishable from those grown or bred in conventional ways. Shueqiu shepherded Long Aotian through the modest frontage into the shop, murmuring that despite the unassuming exterior, the replicator within was a peerless exemplar capable of producing every culinary tradition and flavor known across human-inhabited worlds. She added conspiratorially that a researcher stood behind the establishment and its capabilities. Her countenance, animated and coquettish as she adjusted an eyebrow, belied the earlier chill she had worn upon the battle dais. Long Aotian glanced about with equal parts curiosity and discretion. When Shui asked if her revelation was a secret, he promised in a low voice that the matter would remain known only to heaven, earth, her, and him. Shui indicated a nearby table of dishes and urged Long to observe the ingredients closely. He noted astonished that even a modest Ko Shui Ji exuded a biofield of energy, an intensity beyond that of any ordinary fighting fowl. Declay Jiazu might possess replicators of its own, she conceded, but their creations lacked the depth and provenance conferred by this machine's peculiar force. The table and chairs themselves were wrought from ceramic steel, a material with inherent self-cleaning properties. Micro-drainage channels whisked away oils and residues, and integrated thermal modules rendered the seating temperate in winter and cool in summer, while permitting instantaneous selection between chilled and heated plates. As Long settled, the ambient clamor faded. A sweet, targeted feminine voice asked whether he desired music or dance to accompany the meal. He declined, and the environment transformed into a subtle warm glow with the soothing imagery of a mountain brook. Tempted, Long set about recreating lucifin from earth in meticulous detail. Selecting the noodle texture, the brittle and tangy bamboo shoots, wok fried peanuts, the brittle crunch of yuba, pickled cowpea, wood ear fungus, spicy radish, a piquant soy chili blend, and a gently simmered snail paste. He labored over the interface for 7 or 8 minutes, adjusting composition and annotation until a faithful likeness appeared, his heart quietly eager to discover whether the taste would live up to the conjured vision. Long Aotian stood in patient silence as luminous motes swirled and coalesced for almost a minute, and then, as if summoned from memory itself, a steaming bowl of lucifin appeared before him. The scent struck him like a homecoming. He inhaled once and smiled with certainty. This was authentic. Long Aotian ate with an almost animalistic enthusiasm, mouth full yet unwilling to pause. He laughed between bites, cheeks bulging, insisting that aroma and flavor were different realms, and that stinky dishes, even chutofu, were paradoxically exquisite. This taste, he said, was a memory returned after 10 long years. He surrendered to it greedily. Shueqiu could hardly reconcile what she was seeing. To witness a fellow human, especially one she knew, consume such odorous fare with relish, seemed to her beyond comprehension. She used her authority to siphon the offending stench away from her own vicinity, at last regaining breath and composure. At that precise moment, 2 arrivals announced themselves, apologizing for their delay. Jean Lai and Yin Wu sat, and were nearly felled by the acrid perfume that rose from the bowl. Their faces contorted. For an instant each suspected a poison gas ambush and instinctively braced for battle. Only when Shueqiu explained and discreetly removed the odor from their seats did they relax slightly, though their gazes toward Long Aotian were filled with a mixture of curiosity and repulsion. After they had eaten their fill, Shueqiu exchanged a knowing glance with Jean Lai. He cleared his throat and delivered the intelligence they had all been waiting for. The likely destination for their upcoming assignment was Shuyuxing. Only months earlier, the planet's emperor had been assassinated. The imperial authority had fragmented, and competing factions, including starspace pirates, had plunged the realm into chaos. To prevent the situation from spiraling further, the Life Center intended to draft some of their cohort to intervene. Finally, Jean Lai nodded toward the west, where at a long table several signs of influence sat in a cluster. These were the offspring of Lianbang's 7 great families, groomed and armed with the bearing of military commanders. They were the obvious allies to seek. Wang Guoyi's ties to these families made their assistance plausible and perhaps indispensable. As the group contemplated the difficult choice before them, appetite for reward tempered by the shadow of war, the convivial warmth of the shared meal seemed to stand in ironic contrast to the cold calculations and alliances that now motored toward Shuyuxing. One air rose every inch, the image of aristocratic certitude, and promised to widen Long Aotian's narrow vision. His pronouncement was accompanied by a palpable shift in the air, as if the very atmosphere leaned to his command. The gathered onlookers felt it, that intensifying weight that settles when prowess is asserted without apology. Long Aotin, targeted and aware, perceived the heir's gaze lingering upon him with not merely curiosity, but intent. Long Aotian's defense held enough to blunt the blow, but not to nullify it. The impact knifed through him, numbing his legs and driving him backward several meters. His antagonist, speaking with that calm disdain of one accustomed to topmost rank, praised the attempted counter while mocking its inadequacy. Without pausing, he reasserted himself, his silhouette flashing as he unleashed a second variation of the moon step, the fire kick, its force scorching the space between them like an advancing blaze. As the pressure mounted, the gathering watched in a hush that was part awe, part assurance. The bout had become more than an exchange of technique. It was a display of hierarchy and the merciless logic of status. Long Aotian, muscles taut and spirit-tested, braced for the next crushing assault, while the scion above him prepared to close the distance and convert dominance into a decisive outcome. Long Aotian clenched his resolve. He refused to retreat. If his adversary intended to beat him, then let him try. He launched an impact cannon, aiming squarely for the rival's sternum. Two surging fists collided with brutal force. The impact reverberated, driving both combatants backward in synchrony. Pain flared along Long Aotian's right arm, as if it were scorched muscle and skin burned with searing agony. Luosin Suli eased back a few paces, a cold light flickering in his eyes. He regarded Long Aotian anew, surprised to find that the youth possessed something more than ordinary ability. He was not a mere novice. Long Aotian was not the sort to stand and take blows. Gritting his teeth against the sting in his arm, he gathered his remaining strength, closed the distance with a long stride, and once more unleashed the impact cannon toward the heart. Luosin Suli smiled with disdain. He relaxed like an ancient pine that endures the wind without bending. Long Aotian's fist had barely approached when an unseen biofield altered its trajectory. In that instant, Luosin's hand shot forth, seizing Long Aotian's throat. As one might discard refuse, Luosin flung Long Aotian to the ground. Snow Kyu appeared at once, style betraying haste, as she aided him to his feet. She murmured that the loss was not undeserved. Luosin had employed the second stage of Uebu to best him. Long Aotian spat a mouthful of blood and rubbed his neck. Each muscle in his nape felt crushed, his breathing constricted. He seethed inwardly at the younger scions of privilege whose genes and experience surpassed his own, yet he kept his temper. There was no honor in empty boasts. He conceded, admitting Luosin's superiority. She challenged him to demonstrate Shengming Zongzhen methods, if he sought equal measure. Some privileged onlookers bristled at her sharp tongue. Long Aotian, equally astonished at her intervention, whispered that she should not provoke further, insisting a loss must be borne gracefully. Luosin Suli's contempt returned. He permitted them only a token inclusion on the coming mission and dismissed them brusquely. Snow Kyu and Long Aotian had little desire to linger. They left the shop and parted from acquaintances. Jean Lai apologized awkwardly for the incident. Long Aotian waved it away and went home to nurse his wounds and reflect. He realized that his genetic liberation had accelerated too rapidly, without sufficient life and death engagements to temper it. Though his cannon fist was a high-grade Shengming Zongzhen technique, the privileged science had endured far more real encounters. Lack of familiarity, scarce lethal experience, and an inability to improvise had sealed his defeat. Resolved to train harder, he fretted about the forthcoming journey to Xiuxing. At his present level, the odds of perishing there felt frighteningly high. He also marveled at the arrogance of the Lianbang youths, who seemed impervious to the possibility of a harsh rebuff. Long Aotian answered with solemn humor. He insisted that mere beatings were insufficient. True progress demanded a willingness to accept mortal risk. Snow Kyu, surprised by his resolve, shed levity and assumed a serious air. She asked if he was prepared. He affirmed that the moment he had reached clarity, he had already accepted the consequences. They descended into the subterranean training chamber. Snow Kyu, candid and unsparing, proposed they use genuine weapons rather than practice gear, since truth wrought faster improvement. Long Aotian agreed and set aside his standard equipment. Snow Kyu chided him playfully for his habit of formal address, then allowed a dangerous intensity to mount. The chamber chilled as a pall of cold rolled across the floor and ice crystals formed. Her power sword flashed free in a single decisive motion aimed at Long Aotian's head. Long Aotian detected the blade's release and instinctively recoiled. He moved to put distance between blade and crown, awareness sharpening as the training began. Dodging left and right, Long Aotian found his body riddled with the razor edges of her energized blade, numerous wounds traced across his flesh. He sought an opening to counterattack, yet against a deluge of sword light, it was nearly impossible to discern a single weakness. 30 minutes later, he stood as a figure painted in blood, vision clouded, until he nearly collided with another swing. Had Shueku not mercifully tempered her final strike, Long Aotian's life might have ended on that very day next year. When she finally paused, the killing intent in Shueku's expression remained undiminished. her voice cool as Frost advised go and tend your wounds. From the medical kit, he retrieved a hematostatic spray and a healing syringe, applying each with practiced efficiency. In under 10 seconds, the fresh gore had crusted into scabs the skin and tissue, knitting rapidly. "Forgive the delay," Shinnu Long Aotian said, recovered, and once more presenting himself in the arena. A few minutes of respite passed, then Long Aotian, restored, as if by miracle, stepped back into the center. "Your blade grows keener each session, Shinnu," he observed. "Reserve your judgment until your muscles match the hardness of your words," Shueku replied, and once more the sword net shrouded the training hall. Hours folded into one another, 1, 2, 4, then 6, during which Long Aotian was repeatedly cleaved by the energized blade. He found no true chance to retaliate, and felt at times as if his mind were fraying under the relentless barrage. Fortune favored him when Shueku, ever the superior warrior, perceived the peril in their unbridled practice and called a halt. "Training requires measured rhythm. Today we stop. Tomorrow we continue." She turned and left. Long Aotian responded a beat too late, then collapsed onto the floor. Despite the restorative serums that accelerated mending, cellular reconstruction demanded time that would have failed him were it not for the covert aid of his gene source core. By the 7th injection, he had exhausted the immediate restorative capacity of his cells. The next morning, Long Aotian rose with evident vigor, though he could not recall why he had slept upon the training room floor. He assembled a modest breakfast from the domestic food replicator, and by the time he had finished, Shueku appeared at the door on schedule. Observing his spirited countenance, she noted the absence of the disoriented stupor from the previous day and began to appreciate the extent of his mental resilience. "Shinnu, I am prepared. Are you ready?" he asked. Her swift reply took him by surprise, and within an hour he once again bled and sought treatment. This pattern repeated. Hours of brutal sparring followed by urgent healing, stretching over 5 or 6 consecutive days. Long Aotian's endurance under sustained assault lengthened from 30 minutes to 35, then 40. His ability to regulate negative emotions proved exceptional, and his tactical reflexes in close-quarters combat sharpened considerably. From within Shuekyu's dense sword net, he began to discern micro-openings, threading counterattacks through slender seams. His assaults became a choreography of linked strikes, each move setting up the next with elegant efficiency. By the 9th day, the improvement was unmistakable. Shuekyu departed, and Long Aotian, utterly exhausted, slept early. At dawn, he awoke to a profound sensation in his abdomen, where the gene source core lay dormant. Without time to react, the gene source core transformed into motes of radiant light and seeped into his skeletal frame. As the particles fused with his bones, each union resonated with a dull, thunderous cadence, 206 measured beats, and the pale skeleton took on a burnished golden hue. Energy burgeoned outward from his renewed chassis. Muscles that had clung to bone like fish to the sea now surged with avid life. Blood coursed through the vessels, as if rivers driven to tempestuous vigor. Neural impulses flared like constellations racing across the firmament within him. Organs that had once labored now pulsed with newfound strength. His cognition, senses, digestion, elimination, all functions escalated to a higher tier. Skin acquired a tensile resilience, more leather than flesh, rendering it markedly tougher, though not invulnerable. From the exterior, he resembled a warframe, whose engine, armor, power core, armaments, munitions, and central modules had all been upgraded. It was not merely a quantitative change, but a qualitative leap in his life's architecture. "The vanished gene source core has transmuted my skeleton into golden bone. Supreme golden bone," Long Aotian murmured, flexing his fists experimentally. The force thrumming in him felt both enormous and childlike in its novelty, like a child suddenly bestowed with the strength of an adult. He imagined himself dispatching 10 former selves with ease. A brisk system chime interrupted his contemplation, and a holographic emissary materialized. "Emergency assembly. Arrive at Plaza 777 within 30 minutes. Donning his nanoweave suit anew, Long Aotian could not help but anticipate facing that annoying brat who had been pestering him. Should he strike with a single blow, 2, or perhaps a dozen, just to vent his ire? At this point, his gene liberation rate had ascended to 81%, and to be bested by a peer would not be a matter of one-sided cruelty, but of inevitable consequence. The days of uncompromising duels had not been gentle. Despite Shuekyu's restraint, blades had found the margins of his skull, grazed his eyes, and pierced through flesh in close calls innumerable. Advanced medical science, coupled with the clandestine assistance of his gene source core, preserved him from death more times than he could count. Each life or death contest loosened the genetic shackles within him. The price of such ferocity was steep, but its reward monumental. The gene source core did not simply grant a golden skeleton, it elevated his gene liberation to 81% and inaugurated an evolutionary phase in his cells. Beyond augmenting combat prowess, cellular evolution multiplied functional capacities. Omnipotent stem cells could now self-renew, differentiate, and replenish with unprecedented efficiency. Thus, the metamorphosis continued not merely in strength, but in the very architecture of his being. Within his body, an enigmatic genetic source block appears to originate from an ancient arcane lineage, an artisan's masterpiece left by some primordial engineer. It not only unlocked the shackles upon his genome, simplifying Long Aotian's path to gene emancipation, but also bestowed upon him a mysterious golden skeleton that transfigured his form and elevated his vital essence to unprecedented strata. From the outset, he stood distinct from ordinary humans. Different beginnings yield divergent trajectories. With time, the privileges he accrues only compound. Though all of them are students, when you score 100, that may be your limit, whereas when I score 100, it is the ultimate conceivable mark of the examination paper itself. From such disparity arises unrivaled supremacy among peers. Shengming Zongzin immense and teeming with resources hosts many such plazas, and above 777, Hao Guangchang 1,000 small aerial vessels hovered, compact transport crafts servicing the black edifices nearby. The square itself was a heaving mass of students, each one converging on the emergency summons from every compass point. Among them were graduate students clad in Pimai Zangyi. Long Aotian had already contacted Xueqiu and others through his real-time comm link, and was making his way to the rendezvous, though progress through the press of bodies was maddeningly slow, recalling the helpless bustle of a mass transit surge. Amid the tide of bodies, Xueqiu and Yinwu spotted him first and waved energetically. He squeezed through and asked after the Federation youngsters. Yinwu laughed. Eugene Lai had gone ahead to join them, while the two of them had remained to await Long Aotian. Xueqiu, casting him an admonishing glance, warned that words mean little without commensurate strength, and brandished her Dongli Jian. Long Aotian replied with a playful reverence, addressing her as Shenu before she corrected him to call her Q. She then peered at him intently, marveling that when they parted yesterday, his gene emancipation rate had been 77%, yet in less than a day, she could already perceive a notable refinement in his potency. She dared to speculate half in jest that surviving an annihilative blast, the Minmi Si Guang, had loosened his genetic lock and made breakthroughs far easier. Before he could answer, Yinwu inspected Long Aotian's body with astonishment, palpating flesh as firm as iron. He confessed envy and a wish that he had dared similar experiments in the kingdom. Though Long Aotian did not explain whether the Minmi Si Guang had truly been the catalyst, he would not reveal the cube or the Jian Yuan Kuai. He accepted their praise with the easy, almost roguish gratitude of one who owes a debt he will secretly repay. Xueqiu laughed and insisted he henceforth call her Q. Long Aotian obliged, and thought to himself that she was refreshingly guileless. Yinwu, feeling slightly sidelined by the pair's intimacy, amused himself at the imagined heartbreak of Jean Lai, the persistent suitor who fancied himself the Shennu's future consort despite her clear rejections. Yinwu privately approved of Long Aotian's proximity to Qiu. A murmur of explanation spread. The Jian Yuanxi their teachers had taught them was a forged relic wrought by Shengming Zongzin's artifact, the Wanyu Kikuki modeled after the ancestral Jian Yuan Kuai. Although a replica, it could open genetic locks and heal grievous wounds, yet it endured within a human host for only 3 months before being assimilated. An S-grade single-use war implement, Jian Yuanxi were scarcely possessed even by Shengming Zongzin. To award one as bounty was extravagance indeed. Hopes of a research candidacy award, however, melted under a pragmatic admonition. A Jian Yuanxi could thrust you to Kyorin level, one student hissed. Once you reach Kyorin, postgraduate privileges follow naturally. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for any secret. A mischievous youth, however, seized the moment to inject levity. When pressed, he proclaimed that his teacher insisted Defuneo tasted best with sugar. Laughter erupted, then uneasy chiding as others restrained some from intervening. The teller wore an emblem reserved for Shuezheng Hui members. In the wake of the announcement, Long Aotian listened in silence as the plaza thinned and most students boarded craft bound for the docks. He turned to Xueqiu and asked with genuine curiosity what the Shuezheng Hui truly represented. Xueqiu's eyes curved into crescent moons as she explained that the Shuezheng Hui comprised the most promising candidates for researcher positions. Though unofficial, Shengming Zongzin tolerated their existence. Their membership was obscure, rumored at 100, perhaps 1,000. Yet every revealed member wielded formidable weaponry, including D and C-class war instruments, uncommon even among senior professors. Together with other mission volunteers, Long Aotian, Xueqiu, and Yinwu boarded a descending vessel. Once full, the craft's exhaust belched a blinding blue-white flame, and it erupted from the black edifice into the sky, bound for the orbital dock at the edge of Tian Kai-shing's atmosphere. Shu Yuxing lay at a great remove. Even at superluminal speeds, the journey would consume half a month. By traversing the inner world, however, the transit shrank to 30 seconds. Shengming Zongzin dispatched an elite fleet to escort the convoy through the inner realm. Within the cramped cabin, Long Aotian reacted with astonishment when Yinwu disclosed that Long Aotian's father had provided 5,000 elite legionaries and a space-grade battleship in support. Shueqiu, smiling ruefully, reminded him that a crisis on Shuyuxing could never be resolved by a dozen or so operatives. The Star Ocean pirates fielded forces numbering over 100 million, most of whom would be tied down by Shuyuxing's Royal Navy. The operation thus demanded overwhelming manpower and careful coordination as their vessel pierced the sky toward the inner world gateway. Meanwhile, the Shengming Zongzin supported students who took command of their own fighting companies or hired mercenaries to participate in sanctioned missions. The center did not indulge fantasies of lone heroes cutting down enemy commanders in epic duels. It supported the practical cultivation of command skills, teaching pupils to marshal men to seize fleeting opportunities on a dynamic battlefield. Those who preferred reckless heroics, who shunned strategy and alliance for solitary glory, were permitted to die as they would. The center considered teaching such souls a waste of resources. In less than half an hour, their craft descended to the dockyard. Jean Lai had received word and waited at the landing pad. When Long Aotian and his companions disembarked, Jean Lai strode briskly toward them with an excited twitch. He announced that several Lianbang Suli were already inside, and that they had recruited a few formidable fighters for the mission. The prospect brightened Jean Lai's manner. They followed Jean Lai into a small briefing room and found the juvenile Lianbang sequences they had expected, accompanied by unfamiliar faces that, judging by their bearing, matched Jean Lai's description of /strong allies. The room's occupants glanced up at the newcomers, then, upon recognizing members of Wangguoyi, one of the sequences, Lewis and Suli, snapped a curt rebuke at Jean Lai. He demanded to know why Wangguoyi operatives moved so slowly and instructed Jean Lai to take Long Aotian's party to inspect the required manifest. Jean Lai had meant to introduce Shueqiu and the others to the strongmen and make social contact, but Lewison's brusque order cut him off. The awkwardness stained Jean Lai's face. Long Aotian's haughty bearing sent a ripple of astonishment through everyone in the room. Lewis and Suli's sardonic amusement instantly hardened into an implacable chill, and several other Suli of the Lianbang, together with the formidable guests they had summoned, turned their gazes toward him. The Lianbang Suli's eyes needed no commentary. Their anger was plain in every look. The visiting powerhouses emanated a subtle but oppressive might that subdued the Suli, particularly the figure occupying the central seat, whose austere presence resembled a mountain of authority, imposing the sensation that he could quell anything that stood before him. Under the concentrated attention, Long Aotian felt exposed, as if the man in the central seat regarded him with the same scrutiny once bestowed by Yishebayer. Secrets buried within his body threatened to spill involuntarily. His hidden state could no longer be contained. When that man's gaze slid downward, Long Aotian felt a cold pang of humiliation, as though his younger self had been laid bare. From this man's attire, Long Aotian deduced mastery. He appeared to be a graduate student with a gene liberation rate approximating 91%, a level that made 10 Talong de Guanjia combined barely compare. Long Aotian analyzed this in private, noting that reaching the 91% tier permits conscious modulation of cellular division and a far deeper somatic comprehension, enabling acute perception of another's bodily condition. In confrontation, even the slightest orchestration of organs could be perceived with disconcerting clarity. Not bad, Lewison declared with contemptuous amusement. In a few days you have strengthened notably. Your insolence resurfaces, and you are impatient to prove yourself. He swept a haughty glance across the room and continued, voice laced with pride. Your stance reminds me of my father. He recently tamed a tempest red stallion, a beast equally untamable. Though I cannot yet subdue such a mount, I can subdue you and then break you. Privilege must not be provoked. A roar of indignation rose from Lewison. Very well. I will show you whose fist is stronger. Fury condensed into motion as he vanished and reappeared at Long Aotian's side in a blink. The eerie effect of an advanced combative technique, the hallmarks of a practiced martial art. Long Aotian's eyes flared. An involuntary tremor shivered along his brow as his consciousness teetered toward a death-like stupor. This collapse was not the result of a physical blow, but the invasive pressure of the opponent's biological stance seizing his body's reflexes. Salvation came from hard-won reflexes. Long Aotian, tempered by life or death sparring with Shueqiu, responded with a magnetic barrage. One punch after another hurled forth like howling winds. 9 cyclonic vortices materialized out of nothing, twisting as if a dragon toyed with mountain and sea, their sucking force recklessly ravaging the space. Long Aotian danced within the gale. Clarity sharpened his focus as the suction crescendoed, and the world seemed to spin. Seizing the apex of momentum, he closed his hands and drove them down with brutal intent. The magnetic fists culminated in a cataclysmic strike he named the magnetic eruption of heaven and earth. The voracious draw ripped the air like cleaving blades, shredding the atmosphere into screaming wind and thunderous roar. He inhaled deeply, his chest swelling as air traversed sinew and muscle. His frame expanded into a compact colossus. The magnetic eruption unleashed by that thunderous descent was apocalyptic. more potent than any prior demonstration. It resembled a volcanic detonation, a falling meteor, a towering tsunami intent on splitting the world. Long Aotian's presence, that of a small behemoth, laid a reign of force over the chamber. Shueqiu, observing from the periphery, could not conceal admiration. In their recent life and death trials, Long Aotian had employed the magnetic eruption on several occasions, but never with such devastating potency. The others in the room shared a similar bewilderment, astonishment, and skepticism glazed their faces, including that of the man in the central seat. "How could he be this formidable?" whispered one. "Only days ago Lewison pummeled him," murmured another. "How could he improve so rapidly?" Their gazes flicked to one another, eyes doing the work of questions speech could not. Lewison felt the panic in his bones, as if a meteor had been cast down upon him, sealing every avenue of escape. Could this surge in strength occur within a matter of days? Had Long Aotian truly crossed into the 91% threshold of gene liberation? The magnetic fist technique Long Aotian wielded was an advanced combative art of the Interstellar Institute. Matched to equivalent prowess, it could lock a foe's options with oppressive suction that bred despair. Now, with his elevated life level and the skeleton of gold, his manifestation of the technique transcended prior iterations, rendering it uncomparable to Lewison's previous assaults. In every dimension, the contest tilted decisively. Once engaged, Long Aotian sensed he could steer the duel with ease. A victory hung on the whim of a thought. It was the cruelty of mastery over an inferior adversary, an exercise in unambiguous dominance. Cornered and unwilling to yield, Lewison refused passive annihilation. Planting his hands against his chest, he initiated the hidden step's ultimate maneuver, the Great Wheel Spear, a desperate lethal strike launched from within the concealment of Yinbu. A tide of force surged. A lone black spear materialized in Long Aotian's grasp, yet it seemed threadbare beside the onrushing meteor energy. He roared, palms shaping a falling stone that collided with the dark lance. In the instant of contact, the spear shattered. Lewison Sully spat blood, his frame buckling beneath the ferocious onslaught. The magnetic explosion hammered his back with unrelenting impact, and he collapsed pallid and half-kneeling, reduced to a one shadow of himself. Long Aotian offered no mercy. His second blow had already been coiled and ready when one of the summoned champions intervened with a thunderous cry. He pointed, and the cloak draped over his shoulders transformed with mechanical clicks into an immense greatsword. The blade glittered with a cold, lethal light. A blue flare hissed from its pommel as it lunged at Long Aotian with implacable intent. There was no stopping that sword. The materials and tensile strength of genuine war implements far eclipsed his nano-battle suit. Such arms were wrought for superhuman confrontations, crafted by the elite among the elite. Long Aotian fled backward as the blade destined with hungry velocity, certain it intended to bisect him. The wielder's eyes hardened in determination. At a command, the greatsword shuddered and fractured into scores of blades of varying lengths, an explosive metamorphosis that promised nothing but slaughter. The shard-like spears converged like a metallic porcupine. Long Aotian braced for death, a flash of fury and a string of invectives forming on his lips, but the knives struck too quickly. When the points kissed skin, a white radiance surged outward from his body. The same scene repeated where gene nanoparasites had once been devoured. The blades penetrated, yet left him uninjured. They threaded through him, as if passing along a secret corridor. Long Aotian, panting and bewildered, realized the Daejumo Fang had granted them a unique passage, protecting his flesh while permitting the weapons to traverse. The owner of the greatsword was profoundly flummoxed. The projected hedgehog of blades had vanished without warning. Worse, the massive weapon itself had gone dark. The neural link that bound him to his blade had been severed. His repeated attempts to re-establish connection found no signal. The greatsword lay orphaned, a heavy prize rendered ownerless. Rage and disbelief warred within him. He had earned that blade through peril, countless missions, and spilled blood. Its loss would not only erode his power, but nullify a ledger of hard-won merits. A hush of speculation spread through the assembled fighters. Many had assumed Long Aotian was impoverished, a petty rival unworthy of concern. Now their gazes shifted and widened, as if recalibrating the calculus of power. War instruments could produce the very effect witnessed. Perhaps he too possessed such an implement. Long Aotian allowed their misapprehension to stand. He could not possibly own a war device, yet he had patrons. He served as steward to the Declay Jiazu, the personal attendant to Miss Yeshebayer. The implication of such affiliations was clear and chilling. The story served as admonition and proof. To stand insolently before a person associated with Yeshebayer was to invite peril. Long Aotian's features blossomed with controlled indignation, his expression laced with disbelief and barely restrained contempt. He issued a quiet, sharp challenge, daring the insolent man to repeat his affront in Yeshebayer's presence. The challenger's bluster faltered. The knowledge of whose favor Long Aotian enjoyed had altered the balance of power among them. The immediate confrontation remained unresolved. The orphan greatsword sat like a mute accusation, its disappearance a mystery that indicated an opponent wielding a spatially oriented war device of unknown tier. The prospect that such instruments were at play elevated the encounter from a petty skirmish to a peril fraught with deeper institutional stakes. As tension simmered long, Aotin gathered himself, calculating the implications, while the assembly reassessed where true strength and influence now lay. For months they lay low like frightened turtles, convinced the episode had concluded. Yet when the 10 researchers finally re-emerged from their encampment, they found researcher Yisabe crouched imperiously at the basecamp's threshold as if she had been awaiting their return. The encounter ignited into another savage clash, or more accurately, another merciless rout. On the other side, the proprietor of the massive blade, the Dabayajian, sat in similar torment. He prepared to act the instant Long Itin refused to submit. He believed no force could wrest his great sword from him, not even the most sanctified of figures. Yet upon hearing that it had been seized from Long, consternation set in. To slay him now might merely hasten his own downfall. As his resolve wavered, a woman's voice cleaved through the discord with a calm, disarming cadence. Long classmate she intoned the confiscated war implement is named Kinji Jian. Though it is classified as unranked and therefore considered marginal by some, it is far from insignificant. My comrade secured that weapon only after countless missions and dire gambits, exchanging honors for it. Do not scorn it merely because it is redeemable. Shengming Zongzin does not entrust a war instrument to the unworthy. My comrade, who is your senior, accepted tasks of consequence to the human race, and thus earned the right to exchange for such an implement. She occupied the seat to the right of the primary position, and both her bearing and the seating order bespoke formidable standing. Her beauty was of the kind that arrested the breath. She could be called a paragon without hyperbole. The Federation sequences who had invited reinforcements rushed to explain, but were repelled by her placating gesture. Her apology, while seemingly contrite, carried the faint savor of condescension, the magnanimity of the powerful toward those beneath them. That revelation transformed the crown's status. A bearer with an extraordinarily developed cerebral domain, albeit with a gene liberation rate under 100%, could produce effects akin to a true superhuman. The crown thus ascended to sea level, for it multiplied the user's latent faculties into disproportionate potency. Families with inheritors possessing such neurological gifts could in theory perpetuate superhuman champions by pairing them with that artifact, thereby circumventing the protracted and costly cultivation ordinarily required. The wielder of a war implement is as significant as the implement itself. If Swekyu proved especially attuned to the Kinjijian, discovering latent functions or elevating its potency by several magnitudes, then Shangxu Wangwo's voice within the Wangwoi would be exponentially amplified. Even the Lianbang might be compelled to show deference. One must not disdain a weapon merely because it appears mediocre. The Shengming Zongzin esteems such ostensibly inferior war implements precisely because of the doctrine concerning the user. No one can guarantee a tool possesses only a single capability. Schrodinger's cat could attest to that. Every student covets a war implement of their own. Long Aoshin was no exception. He watched helplessly as his Kinjijian was swallowed, and an ache of powerlessness and grief settled over him. Yet there was no time to indulge sorrow. The immediate crisis demanded resolution. Facing Euphyllite Sweja, Long Aoshin spoke with measured composure. The cosmos may be vast, but it is not beyond the reach of rules. The Shengming Zongzin abides by its own regulations, and Yishebayer the researcher has her protocols as well, none of which he could transgress. Though the war implement he bore had been bestowed upon him by Yishebayer, the events of the day could not be handled without her direct knowledge, nor did he wish to entrust this affair to the Shengming Zongzin and invite a cascade of complications. The only prudent course, he concluded, was to return and report to Yishebayer, leaving the ultimate decision in her hands. He asked Euphyllite Sweja's counsel, and lacking any better stratagem prepared to withdraw and devise another plan later. Long Aoshin raised an eyebrow, exchanging a glance with Swekyu, who shook her head minutely. Only then did he consent. Before taking leave, he cast a sidelong glance at Louis Xinxiuli, whose stare had been fierce enough to unsettle him. Long Aoshin could not resist a wry retort. Teasing failed to ruffle the other, who simply snorted in silence. Long Aoshin repressed the urge to provoke further. The location was wrong for frivolity, and the mood among those present had grown taut and ambiguous. Boarding the shuttle, they sped back to Yishebayer's institute. Long Aotin had long resigned himself to a patient ascent, intending to accrue task merits and thereby earn nomination by degrees. Yet fortune, capricious as ever, had contrived another avenue. The prospect of an expedient path before him made him furtive. He glanced about, and lowering his voice posed a careful question. Had Yishebayer ever forbidden the transmission of her esoteric technique to others? The creature at his side, Shanyin Wanghu, shook its head in bewilderment and answered plainly that no such prohibition existed. Were there others aware that he could access the third secret archive? No. Had a cipher lock been placed upon the art entrusted to him? Understanding dawned in the beast's luminous eyes as it read Long Aotian's growing hope. With a decisive sweep of a great paw, it declared that if he wished to learn it would instruct him. The pair huddled, human and beast murmuring confidences in the rain for a long while. A silhouette bearing a metallic umbrella advanced from the dim distance, closing the gap with deliberate slowness. When it reached a few hundred meters, the figure contrived a small sound to announce its presence. Startled, both Long Aotian and Shandian Wanghu turned guiltily toward the noise. The newcomer revealed herself as Gong Yushuan Yishebayer's personal steward. The umbrella she carried spanned 10 meters, and at the sight of it Long Aotian's pupils constricted. He discerned its biofield and energy wavelength as readily as one senses a prowling engine. This was no ordinary parasol, but a martial apparatus in its own right. No wonder Hagen had intimated she was not an ordinary person. Because the great metal canopy shielded the rain so thoroughly, Gong Yushuan did not need the sealed mask Long Aotian wore. Gong Yushuan offered a mild apology for the interruption. She said she had some affairs to attend to and meant only to exchange a few words before departing. Long Aotian seized upon that moment to ask how she had known of his return. She smiled and gestured skyward, then to the device upon her wrist. Satellites had detected his arrival, whose subordinates below had promptly informed her. Long Aotian's imagination had leapt to surveillance and conspiracy, but the explanation left him mildly embarrassed. For all his paranoia, his sealed visage rendered him invisible to casual onlookers anyway. He felt the moment pass into insignificance until Gong Yushuan's next statements chilled him in the steady rain. Meanwhile, the man who troubled Yufulite Long Aotian sat in the solitude of his quarters. He stroked the mane of Shandian Wang and brooded. Whoever Gong Yushuan answered to could wait. His immediate concern was mastering the destined Mycang. Resolute, he projected his awareness into the Deju Mofang. Long Aotian peered closer and watched the Qinji Jian convulse through metamorphoses. In one breath, the weapon fragmented into a legion of blades. In the next, it reassembled as a cloak. Then it became a monumental greatsword. Moments later, dozens of diminutive blades erupted from its form, like volleying rockets, their icy crescents mercilessly slicing the void. These microblades could detonate upon impact, filling the air with hazardous brilliance. Adjacent to the sword form was a drifting fog that on inspection resolved itself into swarms of mechanical nanoworms. The revelation jolted him. The Deju Mofang concealed more than he had imagined. He grasped, too, that he lacked the authority to extract such a marvel. Even so, Long Aotian reasoned that if mastery eluded him, wielding the Qinji Jian's fragments as blunt instruments would still yield formidable power. Yet the Deju Mofang's functions activated only in response to passive affinity, leaving him bereft of agency and impatient. Resolute to improve, he abandoned further indulgence and returned to practicing the destined Mycang with grim determination. According to its precepts, he concentrated his entire awareness into his brain domain and compelled that psychic material to coalesce. Thought was not an inert stream, it had a proclivity to disperse, to drift like plankton. The first essential task was to shape and still it. He calmed his breathing, stilled his mind, and began to gather the wandering forces into form. He fashioned a hilt first, then coaxed the blade into being. The inaugural sword shimmered into existence. He repeated the process each time, beginning with the hilt before drawing out a blade. The exertion taxed him severely. Neurons screamed under the strain. At one point, he managed to suspend 5 swords within his brain domain and smiled weakly at his own perseverance, thinking his mind near the point of cramping from overuse. But the mind was treacherous and fickle. Just as one sword took shape, it would disperse, then another would follow suit, leaving him cursing in frustration. Hours of dogged repetition brought progress. After 5 hours, he could sustain 16 swords, and the 17th pressed against the limits of his endurance. His breath came ragged. Shandian Wang regarded him with unabashed admiration. Sensing the peril of irreversible damage, Long Aotian prudently ceased before forcing a catastrophic collapse of his psyche. The aftermath of that overreach was harrowing. Information reception slowed to grotesque elongation, simple sounds stretching into drawn syllables. Cognitive processing became a hall of mirrors where meaning slipped and recombined into nonsense. Speech and volition failed to issue forth coherently. For nearly half an hour he remained trapped in that sluggish, garbled stupor before the fog within his mind thinned and clarity returned. When his faculties reasserted themselves, the characters had reformed upon the surface of the Deju Mofang, and Long Aotian observed with a shiver of expectation that the silhouettes behind them glowed far more brilliantly than before. The luminous sheen of the Zhanzheng Binki Qinji Jian cut through the dimness like the locked screen of a game, demanding attention. As Long Aotian concentrated, the Qinji Jian emitted a precise series of mechanical clicks, and instantaneously reassembled itself. A whisper of subconscious inquiry rose within him, asking if he wished to summon the weapon. Long Aotian's instinct answered affirmatively. With a final staccato of motion, the Qinji Jian burst from the Mofang space, and the recesses of his mind manifesting in his palm, as if born from thought. The sudden emergence startled Shandian Wang awake. Had the blade been drawn an instant later, the beast would have paid dearly. Long Aotian soothed Shandian Wang before turning his attention back to the weapon in his hand, perplexed and intrigued by the fact that he had established a psychic link with it. Excitement flared through Long Aotian. Though he had yet to master any sword technique, he could command the Qinji Jian's features. With a thought, the blade segments unlatched, dozens of small swords split free from the body of the weapon, each trailing a cold blue flame from its tang. At his conscious prompting, the tiny blade spun about him in a precise orbital pattern, forming an impenetrable lattice of steel. The rotating web of blades shredded the sofa beneath Long Aotian into splinters in an instant. Shandian Wang recoiled, pressed against the wall, and trembling as the serried swords whirled by. The cluster of serrated darts behaved both as individuals and as a coordinated formation, alternating speeds and vectors to create a composite defense and offense simultaneously. With another shift of will, the small blades rejoined the larger weapon, only to reconstitute themselves moments later into a metallic cloak heavy with industrial sheen. Long's thoughts drifted to the makers of such instruments. Creators of Zhanjing Binki are by and large superhuman beings boasting gene liberation rates beyond 111%. Theoretically, higher liberation yields more formidable weapons. Yet theory is frail in the face of practical chaos. Materials fabrication technique, biofields, energy wavelengths, all introduce variables. The two most critical uncertainties are whether construction succeeds and whether the resultant functions satisfy the maker's intent. A craftsman aspiring to forge an armor that breathes flame and endures extreme heat might find upon completion that the weapon's properties skew toward ice, earth, or wind, or even combine disparate attributes in unpredictable ways. He kept his counsel and muffled the secret of the Deju Mofang from Shandian Wang. The fewer who knew of such a treasure, the safer his life and fortune. The remainder of the night passed without incident, and he slept exhausted. At dawn, he brought Shandian Wang as a prop to lend believability to his story, boarded an aerial vessel, and flew to the dry dock. From afar, he saw Euphiolite and her entourage flanked by savage war beasts clad in metallic carapaces. Fengshen Yulong of mechanical provenance, exuding an aura far more formidable than the patrol drakes he had encountered. Armored implements of war, it was plain to see, offered far superior value than weapons conceived purely for assault. The body is the truest capital of revolution. Should that capital vanish, all else is forfeit. Thus the comfort of possessing a stout, unyielding cuirass to guard that capital delivers an incomparable peace of mind. Shui Qiu followed Long Aotian's gaze and whispered /. He is Dao Siyuan, Ji Sizang, ranked 50th in the Sushingui. / The revelation sent a tremor through Long Aotian. A 50th rank member of the Sushingui, he understood the implications immediately. The precise number of graduate students eluded him, yet he knew that the current intake alone exceeded 80 million. By past precedent, scarcely 10,000 of these would ascend to graduate status. Over years, the graduate population would still number in the millions. The Sushingui did not admit mediocrity. Each scholar who entered had survived rigorous selection, and martial prowess was paramount. Once inside, they fought to determine placement. Those who finished among the top 100 often received rewards from the Shengming Zongzin. The Sushingui functioned as an elite conclave, and within such a circle, the highest ranked were the quintessence of excellence. The Shengming Zongzin invested in tomorrow's pillars, nurturing potential superhumans into genuine paragons. Being 50th in the Sushingui therefore bespoke formidable capability. This cohort could, should their own researchers abstain, wreak havoc even at a genetic liberation rate of 100%. Not through aid from external war engines, but by their own bodies and martial discipline, they would slaughter with casual ease. Such prowess justified the mantle of the elite among elites. Under that scrutiny, Long Aotian felt a novel heavier pressure. When he inclined his head with measured deference and called / Dao Siyuan, / the other answered with an almost amused disdain. Dao Siyuan Ji's eyes danced with amusement. / Long Aotian. The steward of Yishibae Yanjiyuan. You have not learned your craft well, yet you have mastered the arrogance of a favored pet. / He added with an offhand tone. / Did Yishibae Yanjiyuan not leave you any directions? Perhaps you are merely excessively cosseted. / The words stung like a cold wind. Long Aotian understood only the first rebuke fully, the rest was insinuation. The tone betrayed clear antipathy. In short, Dao Siyuan Ji carried open hostility. They could not conceive that he had forged a bond with the war entity Qinjijian, that linking with its spirit had amplified his combat potency by more than a factor of 2. He smiled inwardly at the thought of their astonishment. Confident and untroubled, he waved off their concern. Fear not. Whatever machinations they contrive, I shall not cower. A mere 50th ranked Sushingui member cannot intimidate me. Given time, the Sushingui summit will include Long Aotian among its top 3. The resilient ambition of a traveler through worlds took root and prospered within him. When it bloomed, it would yield legend. His grandiloquence made Shueqiu blush at its audacity and left Yunyu snickering like a small boy. The Shengming Zongzin moved people toward Shuyuxing in 3 daily convoys to meet the planetary exigency. Their original elite armada proved insufficient. 2 additional battle fleets had been summoned. Each fleet boasted 5,000 Yuzhou Jijiadeng Zanzan colossal vessels whose very presence bespoke the peril of the Lishija. The universe of that traversed reality harbored dangers beyond common comprehension. When the last hatch closed, the Yunshu Jian's public address intoned that in 300 seconds the Lishija voyage engine would engage with an estimated transit to Shuyuxing of 30 seconds. The vessel spent 250 seconds rendezvousing with the elite armada, then another 40 slipping toward the fleet's heart. At 10, the Lishija engine hummed alive, and iridescent flames gushed from its exhaust. At 5, external matter began to stretch and condense. At 4, the armada and transport assumed a disconcerting immobility. With the final second, they crossed into the Lishija. Even so, volatile surges of killing intent erupted among some aboard. Luosin Suli was among them. His eyes glowed a feverish red as he fixed his gaze upon Long Etin. Sweat beaded on his forehead, terror, indignation, and a maze of turbulent emotions clawed within his mind. If he did not quell them swiftly, the risk of deformation into psychosis loomed large. The voyage had begun, and the unseen pressure of the Lishija already tested the mettle of every soul on board. The sojourn in Lishija lasted scarcely 30 seconds. Had it persisted a moment longer, at least 40% of the vessel's students might have succumbed to mutation and become aberrations. Those seated opposite Long Aotian were visibly corroded by psychic pollution, yet his own contamination was astonishingly slight in comparison. Most of the students and graduate researchers bore contamination levels around 30%, a minority reached 40%, and the worst were near 60%. Long Aotian's reading remained near 10%, an anomaly amidst the general malaise. Suddenly, the transport ship convulsed as Lishija's glittering vistas collapsed into motes of light that vanished into the starry void. A cerulean planet, Shuyuxing, swelled into view, and the vessel withdrew. Relief washed through every soul aboard. The tangible manifestations of hatred, jealousy, and killing intent that had filled the cabin dissolved with the retreat from the inner world. The crew and passengers exhaled as one, unspoken anxieties easing. None wished to witness a single mutation triggering a chain reaction. Each breathed a silent gratitude that the catastrophe had been averted. Night on Shuyuxing was a savage thing. The temporal berth where the vessel anchored lay beneath a black sky buffeted by a 12th-order typhoon where water twisters 5 dozen meters across roamed like beasts. Fatigue and lingering psychic fatigue made the passengers irritable and unwilling to stir. Eupulite and comrades sought a communal chamber for rest. Daekan Ji retired alone. The Federation's higher-ranked students supported one another toward a small, dim sanctuary. Long Aotian escorted Shueqiu and a few others into a private repose room. Solitary operatives lacking quarters cramped within the outposts shared common area, trying to sleep amid the gale. Dawn arrived as if by quiet conspiracy. The all-night wrath of wind and rain stilled, the sea smoothed into gentle undulations, and the native fish sprang in jubilant arcs. An elegiac choreography that lent the morning an almost painterly serenity. Rest had healed frayed nerves, and when the passengers emerged, they found the outpost transformed. Flags bearing solemn emblems snapped crisply in the breeze. Formations of hardened troops arrayed themselves in measured ranks, each unit exuding the disciplined confidence of elite forces gathering to move forward into Zichu. The scene suggested purpose and portent, soldiers and standards poised to answer whatever summons awaited them on the shore of the ocean world. Dao Cung had arrived without a personal legion. His authority and the prestige of his name sufficed, limiting their aggregate to well under 100,000. For a day they voyaged through the cold pressure of the deep, passing shattered market hamlets lit like funerary pyres beneath the waves. Corpses drifted in the currents, their faces bleached and slack, carnivorous fish gorged with obscene abandon. Each ruin testified to the vivid cruelty of war, yet the enemy, wherever the Shinkong Heideo might be, left no visible trace. Most fearsome of all was the magnetic storm embedded in each Drake's cognitive core. Like Electrovish of legend, they unleashed magnetic discharges that convulsed life within a dozen meters, turning shoals into drifting white bellies. Long Aotian watched them amuse themselves with such electrovishing and could not help the faint begrudging admiration for their efficiency. He accepted without surprise that creatures such as Sheon, the remarkable life forms whose vitality bordered on mythical, could survive beneath the waves with impunity. The wind drakes with rigid beaks and sweeping wings bore an uncanny resemblance to giant mantis in motion. Beside him Shandian Wang, ever exuberant, scratched at the seabed with eager paws and unearthed a crustacean. With a sudden electrical flare the creature was cooked, snapped, and consumed with canine relish. Over and again the animal pawed through silt, coaxing up puffs of golden bubbles and another succulent morsel. The small domestic scenes of feeding and play lightened the oppressive ambience of the deep. Along the reef Shui Qiu, Jin Lai, and Yin Wu sat with masks sealed, motionless and inscrutable, resting or mentally rehearsing. The men themselves could not know. Dao Cung Yufulite and their youthful aides enacted their own solitary rituals in that hush. The closing pressure of the sea imposed a tacit heaviness over the encampment. Even radio chatter was spared aside from periodic admonitions to vigilance. Tension dissolved into a brittle quiet until a sudden eruption of alarm shattered it. Long Aotian clawed his way from the muck, grateful for the integrity of his Nami Zanyi and for the breath he had not yet surrendered. His ears rang and his head swam. Around him the sea was littered with severed limbs and ruined bodies. He called for comrades. Chiyu, Jin, In. And one by one figures hauled themselves free of the silt. Shui Qiu and others emerged. Then Dao Cung and Yufulite appeared, followed by several Federation sequences, though two had been struck down outright by the long-range shells. Farther off, gun flashes still flirted at the horizon. The main camp had survived in name only. Long Aotin had heard tales of the Shi Rinzu's hatred for humanity. Their appetite for flesh and blood rendered them terrifying in rumor and in fact. In the murky light, their eyes glinted with inhuman predation. Nearby brutish shapes of Lufpi Shaoren stalked forward, their hulking silhouettes radiating a savage appetite for violence. Long Aotin could not immediately identify what breed of Lufpi Shaoren these were. The term denotes a bewildering array of green-skinned warrior races divided into two broad factions. For now, the prospect of facing swarms of Warren, squads of bloodthirsty Shi Rinzu, and the unpredictable ferocity of Lufpi Shaoren left the survivors bracing for the next sweep of nightmare. The first chapter of the Lufpi Shaoren Chronicles opens with Shinkong Lufpi Shaoren, beings whose science, social conventions, hierarchical structures, and even physiology flout every familiar logic. Their technology is an affront to reason, their customs defy comprehension, and their bodies are a hybrid of verdant flora and scarlet flesh. There exists a counterpart, the Xingqiu Lufpi Shaoren, whose technological prowess has not yet matured into a stellar epic. The Xingqiu type despises those already traversing the starry expanse, and that antipathy is as irrational as it is absolute. The Shinkong variety reciprocates the sentiment without hesitation. Curiously, not every world tolerates their propagation. On certain planets their seeds wither and occupation remains transient. Thus they occupy some shores only briefly, unable to establish a permanent dominion where the soil will not receive them. Biologically and combatively they outrank the Warren by a wide margin. Among their ranks innumerable apex warriors ascend, making them a dominant force across many biospheres. Amid the concussion, Long Aotian maneuvers to take cover behind the wreckage of a Class C deep-sea gunship. The shell of armor resists direct penetration for a time, yet the relentless kinetic onslaught drives the plating deeper into the silt. A subsequent focused sonic burst finally breaches the hull in a narrow aperture. When high-intensity vibrational energy strikes the suit, a great number of internal nanobots are annihilated. The suit's repair protocols siphon stored nanites from reserves, and failing that reallocate functioning nanites from non-essential body regions to mend vital tissues. Even when the majority of the sonic energy is mitigated, the residual force still inflicts grievous pain. Shui Qiu rallies with Jin Lai and Yin Wu, battering the incoming sonic projectiles with their own weapons in an attempt to neutralize force with counterforce. Long Aotian answers with successive magnetic blows. The collision between a water vortex and the sonic waves yields localized explosions, carving out pockets of relative safety. They converge and counterattack in a dizzying display of swordwork, marksmanship, hammer strikes, and pugilism. Their combined prowess frustrates the sonic ordnance, which now struggles to deliver further harm. Then Dao Cung's voice drills through the current with impossible clarity. As a beam of radiance arcs across the battlefield, it leaves in its wake detonations so savage that Warren and Shaoren ranks are shredded by shock. Where the light passes, the sea erupts in carnage, and the water runs crimson. Tension mounts as a resonant voice propagates underwater, an effect made possible by a compact resonance generator. Yufulite's scoffing remark ripples through the fighters, reminding them of past slaughters and the debts of flesh demanded by the Sanfenician. From the cleft in the enemy ranks strides a man clad in black, his visage concealed by a sealed mask. He is identified by comrades over the comms as Qi Jisho Dia of the Sanfin Yishan, and his presence galvanizes the opposing force. An invisible pressure bears down upon Long Aotian and his allies. Reports of a bounty filter through the chaos. The Xingming Zongzin has placed a price on names, return the head of any listed individual, and claim a Jian Yuanxi. Qi Jisho Dia acknowledges the inducement with relish, though he notes the singularity of life as an obstacle to greed. The confrontation tightens into a crucible. Between the inexorable tide of the Lufpi Shaoren and the ruthlessly pragmatic incentives driving their hunters, the warriors must navigate peril, deception, and the corrosive seduction of prizes that can transmute fate itself. Most Yizhong Xingming emerge from Shengming Jink, but not all are beyond reason. Among them, the Yuxinju are dangerously articulate. Highly intelligent and voracious learners, they adapt with terrifying alacrity. When their Jian Jifang LV reaches parity with a human combatant, they rank among the upper echelons of battlefield potency. Confronting one demands either a superior Jian Jifang LV to crush it outright or a fight to the death if matched. Being outclassed is near suicide. Their dermal resilience outperforms many defensive systems, and their regenerative capacity eclipses the utility of simultaneous combat and healing tactics. Long Aotian registered the menace with a somber composure. He had prior encounters with Yizhong Shengming, the grin-misted adversary he had once defeated while skirting security was a wisdom-level specimen. In his estimation, a single Yuxinja might be dispatched by surprise, but 10 working in concert erased any hope of an easy elimination. He scanned his comrades, noting with a flicker of surprise that Dao Cunji's contingent of Lufpi Shaoren were silently withdrawing from formation and moving away. The furtive retreat exacerbated Long Aotian's unease. The creature continued, insinuating that dialogue had been repeatedly attempted and rebuffed by the cowardly elite. By contrast, certain clever and courageous Yuanzhangs had listened. The Yuxinja's gaze and tone became unmistakably intimate when they mentioned Qi Jisho Dia, as if addressing an old conspirator. Shengming Jiju, the overlord of Shengming Jinku, had allegedly parleyed with these sagacious Yuanzhangs. Together, they planned a new symbiosis. A shared ecological sanctuary where neither species would be subordinate, united against threats such as the starlit insect swarms. Long Aotian's perception sharpened, the true stakes revealed themselves. Yufulite, unfazed by crude observations, advised with a wry smile that the corpses of the Yuxins were extraordinarily valuable. There are 10 Yuxins here, she remarked. If each can be fully processed, we could produce 10 more war engines. The merits earned from such a haul would rival any commission on Shuyuxing. Her tone brooked no dissent. For glory, dispatch them all, Yufulite commanded. Laughter and affirmation rippled through the ranks. Dao Cunji surged forward with reckless fervor. I'll take the Qi Jisho Dia, he declared. Yufulite, you handle the 10 Yuxins. The rest of you handle the lesser targets. Yufulite's response was a cold, efficient order. Students and junior researchers closed in. Without warning, a silver chain erupted from the shadow of her back, long, articulated, and disturbingly animate. It unfurled like a net and lunged at the 10 Yuxins. In her right hand, she drew a gilded longsword. Both instruments converged in a graceful, lethal duet. Around her, the other graduate students unveiled their own war engines. Synchronizing their minds, they formed a lattice of weaponry, an array of converging energies that circled the golden blade. Currents hissed along the sword's edge as it reached its energy apogee. Yufulite then swept it in a crescent slash. A lunate wave of condensed energy arced outward, a blade of light that sought its mark. Alarm flared among the attackers. It's Xingyunsulian. The silver chain, imbued with a biological field that resonated with the Yuxin's own, expanded into a vast web and ensnared them. High-voltage currents leaped along the chain, screaming through the captured forms. The electricity ravaged their neural networks, collapsing muscle recruitment and sabotaging cerebral coherence. Within seconds, the 10 Yuxins were reduced to convulsive ruin and then to unconscious husks. Xingyunsulian was a D-class war engine of formidable practical value, one whose later iterations had been reinforced with exotic materials to push its energy peaks. Once a device that began as a mere baton, it had unexpectedly manifested as a chain, its construction a confluence of dark matter, alien crystallized tissues, encephalic stones, the bones and organs of titanic beasts rule energy and core ores. Its neuroelectric blasts could subdue ordinary life in an instant. If its thresholds were ever breached beyond the 0 point, a C-class upgrade would be conceivable. Qi Jisho Dia, dodging the radiant whip, gaped at the captured Yuxins. They were not merely restrained, the golden blade administered finishing stabs, rendering them pitiably feeble. You presume we targeted you? Yufulite's voice carried triumph. You were simply the first to leap forward. Even make Tangna the mechanist falls beneath our hand. Among the surge of attackers, elite cadets from the Lianbang scions of Wangguo Hui and minor faction pupils had already advanced. If Qi Jisho Dia fell, the day would tilt decisively. Beside Xue Qiu, Long Aotian unleashed a barrage of fists, two then another. The first blow pulverized a frogman's skull. Its dying shot sent a sonic projectile into Long Aotian's abdomen, shredding swarms of nanites and forcing a viscerally painful grimace. Despite his nanoglove's indomitable hardness and the compounding ferocity of his blows, Long Aotian's body succumbed to accumulating wounds. His torso bore a rising map of lacerations and fractures akin to Xue Qiu's own scars. If not for the advance of his prowess, cold steel or a stray projectile would have ended him. Swiftly, he drew a healing injector from his tactical pouch and drove it into the base of his neck. The restorative serum flooded his bloodstream, knitting torn tissue, sealing superficial ruptures, and visibly mending worse traumas. At that moment, Xue Qiu transformed a blue fan in her hand into a returning boomerang that intercepted the blade. She followed instantly with a powered blade, delivering 3 successive strikes that shattered the murderous edge and spared Long Aotian from death. The wound on his neck remained a long, painful incision rather than a fatal puncture. Pressing his gloved hand against the wound, Long Aotian analyzed the ambush with clinical calm. The weapon had seized upon the lapse between his bodily frequencies so swiftly that it left no margin for evasion. Whoever threw the blade had achieved near-perfect timing. Judging by its ability to lock onto his physical cadence and act almost instantaneously, he estimated the assailant's gene liberation rate to be roughly 91%. He could not be precise. The read was an informed conjecture rather than diagnostic certainty. The appearance of the attacker immediately stilled the assault of the Shinkong Heidao. Within the elite formation of the Shi Ren Zhu, a serpent warrior adorned in red-scaled armor stood out among the darker-clad ranks. It bore 6 arms, each brandishing a short knife that gleamed with the same bitter light as the strike that had almost slain Long Aotian. The 6-armed warrior spoke in part intelligible tones and part arcane syllables, accusing the humans of butchering their kin as if they were cucumbers. At once the pirate corps began to withdraw. The students and surviving augmented soldiers interpreted the retreat as the arrival of reinforcements. Augmented infantry and penal enforcers roared as they surged forward to pin the fleeing pirates. Even the scholars erupted into eager charges. Several recognized the 6-armed serpent as Yi Jiaoluo, the 3rd commander of the Shinkong Heidao. The prize for his head, 3,000 merit points, was more than rumor. His body was coveted as prime experimental material. A clamorous rush of greed and ambition swept the field. Young nobles and Luosan Suli cadres flung themselves at him. Yi Jiaoluo met them with an arrogant snarl. He stepped forward with terrifying grace and closed dozens of meters in an instant. His 6 knives wove a malignant tapestry of light, each arc exuding an unsettling wavelength that drew the eye and dared the mind. Those first to admire his blade work were quickly sobered, for the technique carried a hypnotic tincture. Luosan Suli's defense field flared to life and took several cuts, but its shielding dimmed under the onslaught. Yi Jiaoluo did not fixate on a single target. He danced through the fighters, carving down the weaker signs with surgical efficiency while buying time for his comrades to retreat. Long Aotian bore the brunt of one devastating whirl. For an instant, the 6 knives multiplied into a deluge, 6,600, an impossible sea of steel. He conjured the Zanbao defense and became a dark, compact bastion against the storm. Each blow landed with bone-crushing weight, blood leaking from the corner of his mouth as the barrage tested his endurance. Just when collapse seemed imminent, the tempest withdrew and Yi Jiaoluo dissolved into the distance with footsteps that mocked pursuit. The vast pirate host had vanished as if swallowed, leaving only corpses adrift in the water. Across the field, Dao Cunji and Ufulite had engaged Qi Jisho Dia in a fierce contest. Ufulite and several graduate researchers deployed a net of war weapons, while Dao Cunji's luminous scope directed concentrated fire. Together they enclosed the 7-handed Dia. The 10 Wuxinja who had been bound in nebula chains had long since risen from unconsciousness, yet their bodies were rent by myriad sword wounds, and their potency was but a fraction of what it had been. Their radiance had dulled, the battle's balance now tilted unmistakably toward the life center. If Dao Cunji and Ufulite could subdue Qi Jisho Dia, the 10 wounded captives would be hopelessly exposed, and the victory would swing decisively to their side. The decisive advantage on the field belonged entirely to the Xingyun Suolian. Had that chain not instantly bound 10 Wuxins, many would have perished. The entire force might even have been annihilated. Long Aotian pondered the chain's provenance. Was it Ufulite's concealed trump card or an heirloom of her clan? If he possessed the Xingyun Suolian, his combat prowess would rise by several orders. Perhaps he might even fell Yi Jiaoluo, the 6-handed serpent. Such thoughts flickered through his mind as the clash raged. Weapons that had moments earlier been instruments of slaughter now sank like refuse into the mire. Dao Cung's Shaguang Jing, a degrade device, shivered beneath a gray-white membrane, its internal defense protocols thrummed in frantic protest, audible as a persistent hum to those with acute hearing. The stronger armaments resisted a few seconds longer, but one by one the array nets collapsed. Screams rent the air as warriors' perceptions blurred, and then extinguished bodies succumbing to the onslaught of corrupted psychic currents. Euphulite and her companions endured several brutal seconds of psychic torment before coherence slipped. They too lapsed into unconsciousness. A succession of graduate students fell under the onslaught of the Dulo Dan, and even the rank-and-file acolytes fared no better. Bereft of defensive armaments that might grant them a fleeting reprieve, they collapsed at a single touch. Even the Federation's sequences could not raise a cry. Lesser faction students scarcely managed a whisper as they were overwhelmed. Around Long, Aotin, and Emo coalesced a palpable sheath of malice that sought to insinuate itself into his flesh, to surge into his cerebral domain and occupy him. Each filigree of hostility writhed with the intent to possess him utterly. Yet where such spiritual contamination should have amplified his pollution index, both the intramundane influences of Li Shija and the malevolence of the Shengming Jinku failed to elevate him. The materialized malice resembled a hulking braggart in name only, form without force. The Emo on Shui Qiu writhed like a living thing. Long Aotian, uncertain yet resolved, thrust his hand into the membrane. The instant his skin met it, the sheath recoiled, as if confronted by its nemesis. The portion he had touched refused to reseal. The malice gathered elsewhere, leaving his contact area an apparent forbidden zone. Realizing the effect, Long Aotian methodically traced his hands from head to toe, and then reversed Shui Qiu to ensure no area remained untouched. When he finished, the Emo drifted away into the waters in search of new hosts, and Shui Qiu remained unconscious, her brain domain still compromised by residual malice. Long Aotian studied the expelled membranes and attempted to assimilate them into the Daiju Mofang, but the artifact's potential, though immense, eluded his immediate command. Two of the wayward sheets coalesced upon Jin Lai, and Yin-Wu, drawn by proximity to Shui Qiu. He swam across the seafloor, careful to avoid detection by Qi Jisho Dia. The battlefield lay littered with the fallen, only Qi Jisho Dia remained standing, alone and wavering. An unexpected turn of events shifted the balance. Daikon Ji, who had been thought incapacitated, struggled to his feet and roared defiantly, exclaiming that his fate would be his own and that a single Dulo Dan could not slay him. His defensive wargear flickered and sparred with energy, yet still functioned. When blasts of malice struck the armor, their energies condensed into tar-like blocks that sank inertly into the seabed, neutralized by the device's warped discharge. The ruined but serviceable apparatus proved unexpectedly invaluable. Daikon Ji lunged toward his Shaguang Jing, but Qi Jisho Dia's floating hand darted with blinding speed to reclaim it. Bereft of the mirror, Daikon Ji pivoted and fled, choosing survival over a doomed stand. Qi Jisho Dia laughed derisively at his retreat, chest swelling with triumph. He believed himself the solitary conqueror of the Life Center's champions and imagined the lavish rewards San Feng Yishan would bestow for such a feat. Replenishing his breath, Qi Jisho Dia turned toward Euphulite, who still clutched the Xing'an Sulian and whose spirit, though ravaged, had managed to awaken. Though the chain had been exposed to the EEMO, its connection with its wielder preserved it from complete corruption, an enigma he planned to investigate once the mental link was restored. Euphulite, gazing at Daikon Ji's flight and seeing no succor forthcoming, pleaded desperately for clemency, promising to part ways without further conflict. Buoyed by survival, Kizhishao Dia drifted, voice venomous, "Very well. Come then if you seek mutual ruin." Yet Euphulite lay spent, spirit sagging from the ceaseless erosion of malice upon her soul. She could not discern Dia's outline through the haze. She awaited oblivion in resigned despair. Observing no further movement, Dia advanced again, arrogance blooming like a thundercloud. "Euphulite, you feast your hopes on dying alongside me. Delusion. Who here could slay me?" Kizhishao Dia. The hypnotic beam might have felled lesser wills. Even the most liberated could waver under its wash. Yet Long Aotian's spirit proved resistant, scarcely swayed by the Li Shiji's corruption and immune to such modest optical sophistry. When a punch could not pierce, he returned to the blade. The Qinji Jian pivoted, its blades lashed with renewed intent. Dia countered, summoning his 5 auxiliary hands, Rizunshou, to parry and press. The clash was a violent choreography of steel and electricity collisions, sending up curtains of oxygen bubbles and sparks that gleamed like winter constellations. Each contact was a stanza in their feral duet. Long Aotian sought to invoke the finer sword arts, yet the Mofang's selection had locked his optimal techniques. Deprived of refined forms, he hacked and feinted, desperate to convert raw motion into an opening. He had attempted to draw the Wuzun Shou into his magical repository, but the device answered with stubborn silence. Perhaps the core of the Wuzun show remained bound to Dia's person, or perhaps its tier and the wielder's potency forbade absorption. The complications seasoned the fray with irritant uncertainty. Kiz Hishao Dia watched Long Aotian's efforts with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. The younger man's earlier fist had tasted of sincerity, his swordplay now repelled into fumbling improvisation. Dia withdrew 2 hands to steady his defense while prodding Long Aotian's weaknesses. He concluded the youth was posturing. The 3 hands that had pressed forward hardened into a different assault, their tones shifting from measured to predatory. Dia laughed sanguine and scornful, pronouncing that the boy could neither unleash the war instrument properly nor withstand the onslaught. The battle pivoted toward a new, crueler cadence, as both combatants readied for the next gambit. Qi Jisho Dia crowed with triumphant relish at the discovery of another high-grade blade hidden alongside the Xing Insulian, taunting that only those who laugh last truly win. His assault accelerated with every step he advanced. Dozens of blows rained forth. Long Aotian met them with a shifting of the Qinji Jian into a swarm of small blades to bolster his defense, the sword dancing until it left only afterimages. He was grievously strained, and the tide of the fight was turning against him, yet a flicker of determination gleamed in his eyes. With a derisive smile, he declared that his Qinji Jian was but an unremarkable war implement, and then erupting vowed with fierce certainty that he would be the one standing at the end. Surprised by Long Aotian's sudden countercharge, Qi Jisho Dia hesitated and prudently retreated to reassess the unfolding danger, allowing Long Aotian a breath and a moment to steady himself while keeping vigilant. Qi Jisho Dia hurled curses, incredulous that Long Aotian would delay his death and still cling to some distant hope of rescue. The tyrant's fury swelled as he demanded to know who could possibly deliver such salvation. Both combatants had attained a full 100% gene liberation, their might unbounded. Each of the Qian Yanju Shi's myriad eyes discharged beams of concentrated energy, while the Jin Gang Jusho's dermis could crystallize into an armor of facets. After days of savage conflict, the Qian Yanju Shi prevailed. The creator rejoiced, felled the victor, and returned its body to the Sheng Ming Zhong Xian, intending to fashion a blade of war. Fate, however, yielded the Shi Guangjing instead. Displeased by eccentric armaments, he declined to wield it and entrusted it to the Sheng Ming Zhong Xian, remarking that its potential for advancement was vast, with sufficient material flow and ascension to a B-class war implement might yet be conceivable. Long Aotian listened with mounting astonishment. A Jin Gang Jusho that could transmute its skin into crystal. He had one of those beasts catalogued in his own department, an exemplar of terrifying resilience that would rank among the 10 fiercest experimental creatures. Even the feral sovereign Wanshou Ji Wang, father to the Shandian Wang, would struggle to fell such an adversary. For a Qian Yanju Shi to have slain, it implied a scale of power that bordered on the incomprehensible. In a lighter exchange that followed, Long Aotian produced a gilded blade of Yifu Li Te, and with teasing theatricality, handed it to Shueqi. He had noticed her covetous glances and offered it with a warning to keep the matter inviolate, for exposure would force him into exile. Shueqi snatched it, promising steadfast secrecy, and with a flourish that betrayed her loyalty, offered him refuge in her Shan Shui Wanggua should the need ever arise. The two sealed a tacit pact in laughter, both inwardly relieved to have allies rather than enemies. Despite its allure, the golden sword bore a malign membrane that had seeped into its core. Shueqiu explained that while she could physically bear the weapon, to bind with it required a purgation of this malice by positive rule energy. Such sanctified energy could be channeled by a formidable superhuman whose cerebral field would wash away the corruption. The candidate must not hail from the Li Shijia or the Sheng Ming Jin Chu, for energies from those realms would not supply the requisite moral harmonics. Crucially, the helper had to be utterly trustworthy, how avarice or betrayal would turn the ritual into peril. Their attention then turned to the corpse of Qi Jisho Dia. Long Aotian stripped away the ruined garments of war, revealing metallic vestiges that, though tarnished, radiated uncommon quality. The armor felt cool and resilient beneath his touch. Its value lay not only in comfort, but in indomitable defense. Shueqiu identified it as the Tian Jisho, a defensive system that had turned aside countless fatal blows for its wearer. They debated the disposition of the remains and the exchange of Ji In Yuan Shi. Given Qi Jisho Dia's likely 100% gene liberation, even its corpse was a treasure trove of material. Yet handing such spoils to the Sheng Ming Zhong Xian would invite scrutiny. The pair agreed they could not claim sole credit. After all, the victory had been a fluke assisted by Dao Cunji and Yifu Li Te. To avert unnecessary trouble, Shueqiu proposed that Isha Bei heir publicly assume responsibility. She possessed the stature to absorb the bureaucratic consequences and to secure the rewards without provoking suspicion. Shueqiu nudged him and indicated the silent object a short distance away. "What will you do about the Xing Yunsulian?" she asked, eyes fixed on the chain. 10 Wuxins lay nearby as still and sodden as if the sea mud had claimed their vigor. Once they had entered the scene with imperious grandeur, their presence staggering in its inevitability, now they resembled dried cephalopods, each pierced by the golden sword, bleeding and diminished. The resilience of alien physiology was the only reason they had not yet perished. Long Aotian looked toward the chain, desire and prudence warring in his expression. The Xingyun Suolian is a war implement. I do not want to forfeit it, nor the 30,000 merit points that accompany it. He reasoned aloud that the chain likely did not belong to Yufulite, otherwise she would have used it directly against the seven-handed Jia. Perhaps the true owner was a researcher with close ties to Yufulite, someone who had lent the weapon for a specific purpose. Shueqiu spoke with a scholar's reverence as she described provenance and pedigree. The Xingyun Suolian was fashioned by Ni Kalasi Jiaoshou and later entrusted to the Life Center, where the most formidable researcher Gu Yi came to possess it. Gu Yi is the researcher who, it is universally asserted by the elite professors, and even the director, can elevate gene liberation to 201% and enter the Dominion rank. Thus Gu Yi is hailed as the strongest researcher. That Yufulite could borrow such an implement from Gu Yi astonished them both. The notion that a graduate could be acquainted with the strongest researcher testified to the enigmatic talents of certain beauties. Yet prudence restrained Long Aotian. Shall we return it? We carry so many war implements. How can we ferry them all? Leave them here and pretend we never saw them. If others claim them, my heart will ache. Shueqiu's gaze never left the chain, though her practicality won out over altruism. I would feel the pain as well, she admitted. If we are to obtain the Xingyun Suolian, its fate ultimately depends on Yishebayer's decision. Almost at once Jin Lai and Inwu stirred. They recovered with startling agility, springing up as if trained combat reflexes were muscle memory. Jin Lai's eyes swept the scene, astonishment giving way to recognition. Saint's classmate Long, he blurted. Were you the ones who freed us? I remember the maleficent membrane of the corruption bomb. How did you extricate yourselves? Their inquiry hung in the air, not for answers, but as a testament to the small decisive acts that had shifted the balance of that moment. Yunyu swept his gaze across the scene. The seabed was littered with bodies, many ends waved in malignant membranes, the sight of Yufulite separated from her corpse, and the subdued Kizhishaodia made him start. Instead, he stepped forward with a wry smile and offered his congratulations to the Saintess and Long Aotian, pledging that he would never forget the life-saving deed of the day. Long Aotian returned the smile and with characteristic nonchalance claimed responsibility for subduing Kizhishaodia alongside Shueqiu. He refrained from recounting the grisly details, content that the others understood their share of the feat. Yunyu burst into jubilant laughter at the implication of spoils, changing his mode of address to sound more familiar with Long Aotian. Shueqiu acknowledged him with a brief knowing nod, and Long Aotian admitted that indeed fortune favored them this day. Jinli's eyes glinted with practical calculation. He proposed using Saladixing's pollution processor to purge the war weapons of their corrupt rule energy, promising absolute confidentiality and staking his reputation on the assurance. In return, he requested a single war weapon as remuneration. Long Aotian, thinking of Yishebayer's expertise, demurred politely. He could summon her help instead, but inwardly wondered why Shueqiu's Shangxiu Wangwo lacked such apparatus. The thought that Shueqiu might be consolidating ties with him pleased Long Aotian. Her trust soothed him. Tension coiled like a drawn bow as Jin Lai confronted Long Aotian. Jin's voice, edged with indignation, accused Long of stubbornness and warned that his unilateral decisions imperiled the group. Long, chastened and rueful, confessed that he had only proposed the plan out of gratitude for a prior rescue and out of trust in Long Xiangdi. Jin pressed on, insisting that such a disposition could not carry their collective far. If Long persisted in acting alone, perhaps dissolution would be preferable. The room vibrated with unspoken resentments. Long Aotian, face drawn, realized he had misjudged the mood. He pleaded for conciliation, but the admonition hung in the air like an accusation. Before any reconciliation could form, the confrontation took a fatal turn. A sudden icy blue light flashed in Jin Lai's eyes. A crushing impact struck his chest, as if an invisible maul had come down from the heavens. His breath came ragged and shallow, a crimson suffused the whites of his eyes. In a grotesque, terrible instant, his head separated from his body. He clawed feebly at the air, his gaze still accusing even as life fled him. The two who had struck moved with grim efficiency. The aftermath was a tableau of stunned silence. Inwu tried to laugh off the momentary impatience he had felt, admitting he had been on the verge of intervening more than once, while Shueqiu observed the corpse with a resigned sigh and told Long Aotian that by rescuing Jin, he had condemned him. Had Long left him to his own devices, Jin might have endured. By saving him, Long had sealed Jin's fate. They wasted no time in scouring the vicinity for oversights. Long strode to the side of Yufulite, a formidable strategist whose vitality was now precarious. Once prepared to die alongside the seven-clawed Dia, she now lingered on the precipice between life and oblivion. Her gene liberation reached its apex, yet her cerebral domain was being corroded by a malignant membrane, an insidious force that assaulted the mind rather than the flesh. At this stage of being, like Euphyllite, retained prodigious organ function, digestion, and hepatic resilience that nullified ordinary venoms. Yet her brain domain suffered an existential siege. Such negative rule energies did not merely poison the body, they penetrated and eroded the very sanctuary of thought. Long Aotian, with a brusque mixture of pragmatism and pity, retrieved Euphyllite's golden sword and seized the Xingyan Suolian from her grasp. The malignant membrane recoiled along her arm as he did so. He attempted to stow the chain within his Mofang space, but the artifact resisted absorption. It trembled violently and emitted an electronic vibration whose frequency climbed with alarming rapidity. Xueqiu speculated that the chain harbored an active signal source, perhaps connected to the 10 Wuxins it still bound, which might prevent assimilation into a spatial reserve. Long considered the brutal expedient of severing the heads of the Wuxins to free the chain, but abandoned the notion as both grisly and tactically imprudent. The chain itself could not be carried away without courting immediate peril. Xueqiu inquired in a gentle voice, asking whether Long Aotian was unharmed. He murmured reassurance, though he himself could not comprehend the recent events, offering comfort instead. They agreed it was prudent to withdraw. Such an upheaval might draw unwelcome attention. Aware that the present moment was ill-suited to explanation, Xueqiu and Yinwu hurried away with Long Aotian at their side. Consulting the knowledge recorded in his real-time communicator, Long Aotian reviewed scattered entries about Deiju. They were enigmatic artifacts of bewildering variety and formidable power, their origins lost to antiquity, and their modes of emergence inscrutable. Human champions had modeled war engines upon them, and nearly every great organization possessed a signature Deiju capable of shifting the balance of power. Rumor held that the Jixierenjiao possessed an artifact called the Haininj Kaiju Edge, an intelligence that could inhabit and transform any machine, regardless of whether it bore a biological field. Even a mechanical pencil sharpener might host such a sentience. Conversely, not every Deiju was sublime. Some were prosaically mischievous, like the reverse trash bin that transmuted anything placed within it into mundane household refuse. The spectrum of Deiju function and form was vast. Long Aotian's brow tightened as he assimilated the revelation. In human parlance, there were no stage 2 life forms, no immortal or energy states, only crude gradations of vitality. If Linghao Mofang perceived a radiance corresponding to stage 2, that menace lay beyond ordinary comprehension. 5 he acknowledged owed itself to the golden-boned advantage rather than innate supremacy. He could envy that terrifying puissance, and he did, though the envy changed nothing. He admired Isha Bayer's prowess as well, yet he remained scarcely as formidable as one of her fingertips. They abandoned the battlefield at once. Long Aotian led Xueqiu and Yinwu into the abyssal trench, accelerating with practiced strokes. Before departing, he used a magnetic strike to draw 7 corpses of Qi Jisho Dia, the monstrous 7-handed Dia, into Linghao Mofang's interior and discarded their remains within the cube's private space. As Linghao Mofang's awareness revived, it reclaimed certain active functions, such as spatial transference of objects into its inner domain. In the cube's containment, the corpses were arrayed in a sigil-like pattern. The trio propelled themselves deeper into the oceanic gulch until their silhouettes dissolved into the dimness, leaving behind a myriad of fellow students and researchers beset by a pernicious membrane of corrosion that devoured them slowly. Not long after, 2 figures cleaved the waves and returned to the scene where Long Aotian had stood. One was Dao Cunji, who had earlier been driven off by Qi Jisho Dia. He trailed a man whose cloak bore the mark of a solitary character. The companion's visage was composed and imperturbable. His brows were like drawn blades, his gaze celestial and unperturbed, his aura harmonized with the world as though he and the environment were a single continuum. This man was Gu Yi, the reputed paragon among researchers, the proprietor of Boga Tanjin Yanjiu Sua, and the legitimate bearer of Xingyan Suolian. Dao Cunji quickly surveyed the aftermath and informed Gu Yi in a low voice that Qi Jisho Dia appeared to have fled. Gu Yi's reputation was no mere rumor. Within Shengming Zongzin, 1,000 researchers enjoyed extraordinary privilege and sovereign combat capability. Each commanded a private institute carved into the center's habitable swathe, cultivating devoted acolytes and loyal experts. To oppose one of them was to face a force capable of dominating any theater of battle. Wherever there are people, hierarchies inevitably form. Our researchers are no exception. At Shengming Zongzin, the most formidable among them was Gu Yi. His prowess was acknowledged even beyond institutional boundaries. Adversarial researchers whispered his epithet Gushan with a mixture of reverence and dread. To confront him in combat was not a matter of courting victory, but of surviving. Such reputation bestowed upon him privileges befitting a Jingyin Jiaxiao, and his talent was terrifyingly prodigious. Everyone believed he was destined to ascend into the dominion of Chaoring Ji at a gene liberation rate of 201%, a rank capable of unifying and commanding life across cosmic strata. Long before Gu Yi attained his current eminence, the Xingyun Suolian had already been wielded as his instrument of war. With his present might, the chain's assistance had become superfluous, so he entrusted it to Yi Fulite to help the latter secure the supreme reward of the Shiyu Xing expedition, the Jian Yuanqi. That boon propelled Yi Fulite toward Chaoring Ji and into Gu Yi's retinue. Moments later, Gu Yi's countenance shifted imperceptibly, his placid eyes kindled with a sliver of warlike intent. He had perceived an absence. The Xingyun Suolian's signal was gone. The chain had become unanchored. Who had erased his signal? The question sparked a chain reaction in his demeanor. Around him, the ocean commenced to behave as if brought to a boil. Surreal flames, not of ordinary fire, but of manifest energy, leapt and simmered the seawater. Those ends waved in the malicious membranes that encrusted the seabed. Among them, Daekanji found themselves encircled by those uncanny flames. Daekanji, resentful and indignant over their recent losses, blamed Qi Zhishou Dia for the disappearance of the Xingyun Suolian and the theft of their war apparatus. He railed against the stratagem that had deprived them of the Shaguang Jing and boiled with fury at the thought of retribution. Gu Yi, unperturbed by the invective, observed that in warfare there is no moralizing of cunning. Opponents prevail when their techniques supersede ours. He chided Daekanji gently for his dependence upon a single instrument of advantage, advising instead that he temper his reliance with ascetic refinement of his own corporeal limits. If Daekanji had heeded such counsel earlier, the skirmish might have resolved differently. The Ki Huoyan seared the seabed into a hardened, muddy slab. With a gesture, he pushed that solidified mass. A rolling tide bore the cocooned sufferers onto its surface. Standing upon the mud, Gu Yi cleaved the waters with astonishing velocity. Daekanji, grasping the edge to avoid being swept away, watched as the unconscious were securely fixed within the hardened block. Before long, they were underway toward the sanctuary that could heal and adjudicate the event. Xue Qiyu's gaze sharpened with suspicion. The historical record held many instances of other races deploying guises to infiltrate and wreak havoc. Such deceptions had precipitated catastrophic outcomes. Institutions maintained rigorous biological authentication for this very reason. Long Ao Tian, palms open in a placating gesture, insisted on his humanity and professed no intent to harm. He argued plausibly that no prudent race would entrust an autonomous artifact to an incompetent agent solely to foment destruction. More often, he suggested such devices might be gifts, instruments of leverage rather than instruments of sabotage. A fragile, incredulous laugh escaped Long Ao Tian as he stared at the unforeseen complication. The sudden awakening of the cube had upended his carefully laid plans, offering both advantage and peril. He could no longer conceal the ruse of the tiger skin pretense from Xue Qiu and Yu. Yet any attempted explanation might spill more of the cube's secrets and provoke a lethal confrontation among the three. His mind raced, processors burning with hypothetical scenarios, seeking an account of his identity that would not betray the cube. After a long, heavy silence, he feigned resignation and proclaimed with a chilling cadence that he could not disclose his true nature. He suggested theatrically that if they insisted on believing him to be an infiltrator of an alien stock, then, to preserve the secret, he would be compelled to slay them both. The menace in his tone sharpened the air. Yunyu, ever impetuous, snatched up his warhammer and pleaded for calm, beseeching Xue Qiu to confirm whether Long Ao Tian was truly a foreign infiltrator. Xue Qiu's wary expression dissolved into laughter. She admitted she had been teasing, trusted that he was human, and chided him lightly for the distress he had caused. The two companions relaxed visibly, the tension melting like mist under morning sun. Long Ao Tian allowed himself a rueful smile and admonished her to refrain from such jests in future. With spirits steadied, Xue Qiu turned pragmatic. She declared that the rule-bound energy contaminating the comrades' weapons had been purged. She handed Huangjin Jian to Xue Qiu and entrusted the Daigang Chui to Yunyu, instructing them to perform a psychic link and register the signal reservoirs. The weapons, once mentally bonded, would bear their unique biofield signatures. Any other user would have to supplant those signatures to wield them. Long Ao Tian and Yunyu nodded like schoolboys, acquiescing to the council. They synchronized their minds with the weapons as instructed. The mental link hummed alive and then subsided. The Huangjin Jian now bore Xue Qiu's biocurrent and wavelength as its core signature, and the Daigang Chui reflected Yunyu's imprint. The two warriors felt their capabilities surge several tiers as the armaments resonated intimately with their consciousnesses. For 7 consecutive days, they encountered numerous bands and skirmished ferociously with Shinkong Heidao and hostile academy's retinues. Each deadly engagement liberated dormant genes and elevated their gene release ratio. Before long, they approached a breakthrough near 91%. The The road hardened them, wounds and victories braided into determination. Perusing the slain and the intelligent scrawl, Long Aotin's gaze snagged on the name, Meiktangna, a master mechanic listed at the top of the kill roster. If Meiktangna were the architect behind the nanoinsect assaults that had hunted Lightning King and others, then eliminating him would be the most valuable prize in the Shuyuxing theater. Even the collected heads of Qi Jisho Dia and the 10 unsent would not outweigh the worth of Meiktangna's capture. They had known rumors that Yishibae might appear on Shuyuxing, but no one had reported her presence until now. Providence had placed her, or fate had contrived it, on the periphery of Weenie Si Chung. The opportunity to uncover Meiktangna's role, perhaps to capitalize on the chaos and reclaim advantage, lay suddenly within reach. Long Aotin hesitated, a cold knot of unease tightening in his chest. He was gambling everything on a frail pretense. If Yishibae perceived the deception, he would be condemned without mercy. Those living currents merged with the water dragons and leviathans and renewed their assault upon the pirate bastion. The strike was devastating, and swift defensive batteries flickered and died as though snuffed by a hand. Only the mechanical Jixi Namenchong clung to the wreckage, futilely prolonging the defense. The Jixi Namenchong were no ordinary automatons. During manufacture, their Jixi Migi had been infused with the force fields and energy wavelengths of formidable alien vermin, rendering some specimens into concealed assassins within the swarm. They could erupt into sacrificial detonations that cast smoky silhouettes of writhing creatures. Yet, even those clandestine predators could not survive the overwhelming onslaught of living water in such numbers. Entire columns of nanobug swarms detonated and collapsed. 3 figures buried in seabed mud watched in stunned silence. Tens of thousands of troops equipped with heavy ordnance and massive mechs, and aided by the nanobugs, had been annihilated in mere seconds. Long Aotin wondered inwardly whether the Linghao Mofang in its prime could have bested Yishibae. Suddenly, several silhouettes burst free from the eddying water life, scattering and sprinting across the waves. One of them was the roster's top, named Jixiashi Meiktangna. The square Jixi Migi he bore vented a ring of energy from its rear, enveloping him in a pulsating globe of light that propelled him at breakneck speed. In a blink, he had cleared the trio's muddy concealment. But speed was not the only facet of power. Yishibae, clad in a dazzling gown of crimson that made the surrounding sea appear as her retinue extended her hands and drew a sudden gust. The wind braided with her water, and a swirling vortex sprang up, chasing the globe with hungry persistence. In an instant, the light sphere was swallowed. Meiktangna's screams tore at the cold sea. His defensive field collapsed in a heartbeat under the vortex's strain. His body convulsed as if skeins of force had twisted his limbs. Even his partially organic tissues were savaged crimson, seeping from rents in his flesh. He had breached a natural law by manifesting multiple elemental energies in one person. Panic had robbed him of prudence. Yishibae followed the faint informational wavelength the device emitted, sensing its trace with the acuity of a seasoned researcher. She detected the reception point in a distant trench and deduced that the Jixiashi's retreat had not been pure escape. As she pondered whether others of the Jixiaranjiao had aided him, her attention turned back to the 3 shapes in the mud. With a calm, almost indifferent invitation, she bade them emerge. Long Aotin and his companions rose from the silt. Their salutations were formal and measured as they faced Yishibae. She did not know Shuekyu and the other companion, her gaze fixed on Long Aotin. Her eyes, like twin pools of aquamarine, sent probing waves through him, scanning every contour and current within his being. Had it not been for the Neiyu Kangjian, her scrutiny might have unmasked everything. Her analysis was clinical and precise. The biophysical field exhibited no anomalies, his energy wavelengths registered as normal, yet his Jian Jifang LV had mysteriously surged by 20% in less than a month. She sought to learn what recent events he had experienced to provoke such an increase. Long Aotin answered with audacious arrogance. He proclaimed himself a genius no less than Yishibae, insisting that after surviving the obliterating death ray, his latent talent had only become more apparent. He spoke of outpacing her in time and of marrying her with blithe confidence. His braggadocio produced a faint, inscrutable shift in Yishibae's expression. At that moment, Yishibae smiled with a chill that belied nothing of warmth. The sea around her seethed not with flame, but with an enlivening pulse. It was as though the water itself were waking. Under the gaze of the Desclay family's finest scion, a top-tier researcher's inspection, and an arch-superhuman with a Jian Jifang LV of 141%, Long Aotin's mental contours felt peeled and exposed. Just as his consciousness began to be pried apart, Long Aotin acted on instinct. He invoked the Di Sen Mai Kang Yeju. Within his Neiyu Kangjian, he concentrated and assembled slivers of mental force into long, exacting blades. These forming swords arranged themselves into a venerable array, the lattice of which contained the very source of his awareness, his spiritual core. He strove to anchor his mind within the ancient geometry of the sword formation and resist the invasive scrutiny. Yishebayer spoke with detached equanimity as she appraised him aloud. Among the scions of the Declay lineage, he was, aside from herself, the most prodigious. Amid the billions educated within the life center, he counted among the rare few. Long Aotian bowed with sincere deference, humility tempered by ambition. He pledged to vie for mission rewards, accumulate resources, and hasten toward graduate-level cultivation, swearing not to tarnish the family name. His frankness earlier, that he too possessed genius, was forgotten in renewed submission, and Yishebayer offered no rebuke. Instead, she turned her attention to Shueqiu and Yin-Wu, instructing them with laconic authority to deploy to Venice, where several large-scale operations were imminent and ripe with merit. Shueqiu and Yin-Wu accepted and departed without protest, their forms vanishing like two dolphins cutting through distant horizons. Once they had gone, Yishebayer's scrutiny returned to Long Aotian. She did not speak. Rather, her gaze emitted a subtle wavelength of energy that painted surreal patchwork visions upon the air. He felt exposed, as though a poised blade hovered at his throat. Linghao Mofang lay inert, perhaps depleted, or perhaps prudently quiescent to avoid detection by Yishebayer. The cube had ranted of transcendent hierarchies, second-stage life forms supreme, a plunder of the arc of life to ascend third-stage beings. Yet when a superhuman stood within reach, it clammed up instead of seizing the moment. The contradiction bemused him, but he dared not voice it. Linghao Mofang's voice leaked out in furtive whispers from within its facets, so discreet that Long Aotian nearly started from his trance. Even within the confines of the neural domain he inhabited, he felt the cube's cautious dread of Yishebayer. Swayed by that anxiety, he murmured with thinly veiled irritation, "I know that already. Could you cease with the sarcastic remarks and offer something substantive?" Linghao Mofang replied in hushed tones, "Allow me to search. I will see which option best suits your present condition. I mustn't linger." Though she appears in a state of quiet contemplation, these Shuishengming act as her eyes and ears. Prolonged discourse might alert them to an anomaly. With that, the cube withdrew and sank back into its concealment. Before those fiendish shapes could close to even 500 meters perimeter, Shuishengming entangled and throttled them. Bodies ruptured and vaporized into inky mists. Relentless and implacable Yishebayers assembled aquatic life rushed the rocky aperture. Innumerable Shuumhausi were butchered in the surge. The opposing forces collided like two inexorable tides, one an embodiment of savage daring, the other a disciplined bulwark of lethal purpose. For half an hour the slaughter continued until the intruders ceased their assault, evidently recognizing the futility of further charges. She elaborated on the Shengming Ji Min, describing it as a crucial construct within a Shengming jink when endowed with bizarre dangerous functions. If it can be destroyed, the surrounding Maiwu Shija becomes far less perilous. Yet the jink never leaves the gate unguarded. A substantial host will be arrayed in defense, and within that host lurks an ode to authority, a warlord of alien provenance. He is perilous, and he is my quarry. As she finished, the Shuishengming that had fanned about them folded back, each current and creature dissolving into her being, until she was once again a solitary figure moving through the fog. They entered the Maiwu Shija together. The fog was not a formless cloud, but an assembly of currents, sheets, and eddies that flowed like segmented rivers. The local flora bore myriad apertures. The fog streamed through these orifices with mechanical inevitability, as if the plants channeled mist through a labyrinthine conduit system. Regardless of a plant's girth or scale, every channel surrendered the fog in patient procession. Some vapors scintillated with a cold phosphorescence, while others remained as black as a starless abyss. Within luminous fog the world felt strangely illuminated yet obscured. Within dark vapors, orientation depended on detection via biotic fields and energetic wavelengths rather than sight. The eyes did not flee, they circled, appearing alternately ahead and behind, as if weighing their prey. Just as Long Aotian braced for an assault, the gaze and the shapes dissolved into the fog, and a muffled gurgling rose around them. A sable silhouette lunged forth, features emitting a faint blood-like glow. Its 10 fingers were long and blade-bright, its presence utterly predatory. Without hesitation it launched a ferocious strike. Long Aotian narrowed his eyes, and without a second's doubt, deployed Yinbu, followed by Zijian. The concentrated thrust of his fingertip erupted like a thunderclap. The shadow skull imploded, its headless body collapsing and spasming on the ground. Examining the corpse revealed it to be a Benenj, an entity governed by instinct alone. Its frame bore a singular odd cavity. Bowing slightly, Long Aotian addressed the companion beside him with practiced courtesy. Benenj possessed no consciousness, their might derived from raw instinct. Blade and bullet glanced off them, their claws capable of shearing iron. They hunted every living thing in their path, and where the eerie mist intruded into human settlements, they prioritized the slaughter of non-mist denizens. Even those warriors who had unlocked 51% of their genes had to approach such beasts with utmost caution. One misstep could be fatal. Yet their bodies held exquisite resources, prime materials for warcraft and augmentation. Their now Jinti the brain crystal could invigorate dormant cells and assuage the first gene lock. It was the core of their worth. Regretting his earlier habit-driven strike, Long Aotin realized he had shattered the nose of value. He crouched, slit open the creature's tailbone sheath, and retrieved a segment of Jing. Though inferior to the now Jingdi, the Jing was still served to aid gene unlocking and remained fiercely sought after. The fragment felt cool and clean in his hand. Yishebayer observed his technique with mild surprise, recognizing the refined pedigree of his method. She identified the movements as the advanced Yinbiu and Zijian from Nia Yanjian, and Long Aotian confessed he had emulated what he'd seen of Luosin Suli practicing in secret until he achieved the form. Yishebayer corrected him with serene precision, noting that the execution was commendable in shape, yet lacking the ineffable spirit that renders a strike truly invisible and instantaneous. She instructed him to marshal all force into his fingers within the final 3 meters of approach, and to present his body half exposed to the enemy, thereby enabling seamless transition if the first blow failed. Her counsel refined his comprehension. In a few succinct directives, she condensed lessons that would otherwise require years of solitary practice. Long Aotian absorbed these nuances with the grateful hunger of a pupil. The Mofang's optimal parameter had already nudged his arc of understanding to an exceptional height. Under Yishebayer's tutelage, his grasp of pugilistic principles accelerated until it threatened to eclipse Luosin Suli's methods. At Yishebayer's command, Long Aotian inclined his head with serene composure. Before them prowled 50 Shalian Mywer Ren, their gene liberation rates varying, but averaging around 81%. Long Aotian himself registered 89%, tantalizingly close to a threshold that would unlock a wholly new phase of capability. The order from Yishebayer carried the unmistakable weight of appraisal. This was as much a trial as it was a patrol. As Long Aotian and Yishebayer stepped into the luminous temporal mist, the laughing mist figures faltered for an instant before their cackles swelled in fevered cadence. Slender white as scavengers, they scuttled with improbable speed across the ground, 20 meters traversed in well under a second. Their assaults were crude, reliant on bodily advantage rather than refined combat techniques, yet their power and resilience surpassed that of mere instinctive creatures, making them dangerous nonetheless. These last 10 moved with synchronous precision. Their reactions, situational adaptability, and tacit teamwork repeatedly threatened to shear away Long Aotian's head. They attacked in concert, advancing and retreating as a single organism, testing and probing. He found himself resisting the temptation to retrieve heavier ordnance from the Mofang Kongjian, lest Yishebayer be watching from concealment. Suspicion and strategic restraint warred within him. The human body is a vessel. Without expansion, it cannot accommodate more. To shatter the Jian Suo and elevate one's Jian Jifang Lu is to grant the frame additional capacity and act akin to giving the body new chambers to house greater forces. In that instant, Long Aotian perceived himself as a warhead, a concentrated core of cerebral might. The energy he radiated from his brain domain and the forces he summoned seemed capable of annihilating any opposition with contemptuous ease. An invincible temperament swelled within him. The seed of a superhuman heart took root in his mindscape, germinating in the recesses of his brain domain. To strike not was to preserve false peace. To strike was to rend heaven and earth. Such was the certainty that animated him, an implacable presence before which resistance felt ludicrous. 91%. This threshold carried its own terror. The human body contains myriad cell types. Among them, a certain sensory cell reacts keenly to particular substances and atmospheres, relaying those impressions with blistering speed into the neural filament network. By inducing rampant proliferation of such cells, even with his eyes closed, Long Aotian could read the world through shifting currents of air, through the whisper of temperature gradients, through the subtlest contact sounds. Every nuance of the environment was distilled into data and streamed to the CPU of his cognition. A charging Shalian Mywaran leapt to evade, but Long Aotian's left side assault struck with mechanical inevitability. The technique, like a treaded flying kick, met its mark and shattered a skull. Before the echo died, a second figure materialized into the arc of his punch, an impact cannon of a blow sent another headless body tumbling. The smile-faced fogmen floundered. Their evasions were perfunctory, as if fate pushed them into his strikes. One by one they fell, some colliding into his fists, some meeting the brutal surface of his boots. He lifted the final foe by the collar and crushed. The glassy crystalline plates embedded in those bodies rasped against his nano gauntlet with a shrill grinding timbre. Under his relentless pressure, the crystal abrad into a white froth that floated like dust in a pool of water, testament to the force behind his grasp. To Yishebayer, such a warrior was invaluable. If Long Aotin ascended into the superhuman ranks and allied with research, his untamed potential would become a singular boon. She imagined the benefits, the golden-boned advantages, the optimization of the Mofang, and calculated that his ascent would not be squandered. He accepted the augmented gauntlet with gratitude and a private longing. He had hoped for a full-scale war instrument, something he could recharge and wield without limit. Nevertheless, the water energy enhancement felt potent and boundless. Whether its supply would ever be exhausted seemed unlikely, though he retained a pragmatic skepticism. They readied themselves and moved on. The road toward the life gate stretched ahead, dense with mist and threat, but Long Aotian walked it with a sovereign's calm. Every sense was a sentinel, every step was a calculation. The promise of ascension thrummed at his core, and the world before him whispered of trials that would either forge him into legend or consume him utterly. Worry tightened around him further when he perceived variety among the fog-born beings. Interspersed with smiling faces were sorrowful visages, alien myriad whose grief-wrought features marked them as command cadres. Even one such figure would trouble Long Aotin. Several caused his pulse to quicken. He realized these sad-faced creatures were a higher echelon than the laughing mist people, likely officers within the host. The prospect of multiple senior commanders presiding over the formation made the situation precipitous. Closer inspection of the gateway revealed enigmatic pictographs carved across its arch. Energy currents flashed and raced across those glyphs, their function inscrutable. Below, 10 immense banners streamed in the tidal flows, yet their centers yawned uncanny voids like hollow black eyes. Atop a constructed platform above the life gate stood Machine the mechanician, flanked by several figures whose faces were oddly familiar despite this being their first encounter. Most arresting of all was a being with a great hole cleaving its chest and a face contorted in abject sorrow. Its skin was sheathed in black metallic scales whose alloyed sheen lent it an austere majesty. An unsettling aura poured from its form. It was a Jundu. The life gate answered with a disciplined stratagem. A concentrated beam of energy shot forth, sweeping aside the time fog and revealing the two humans in the open. The probing beam indicated that the Shengming Ji-Min's commanders had suspected an unseen contingent and had tested the veil. Finding only Long Aotin and Yishebayer, their hesitation vanished. The host unleashed itself. Mechanical and organic forces converged into one seamless onslaught. Machine rose with a snarl of contempt. The mechanical cache at his chest glimmered and clicked. In an instant, it disgorged a swarm of mechanized nano-insects that hummed like a malignant cloud. The tiny machines cascaded forward in dense rapacious torrents, intent upon disrupting flesh and field alike. Machine healed beyond expectation. In fewer than 4 days, radiated confidence. He taunted them, deriding their attempt to breach the Shengming Ji-Min and vowing to measure them by the judgment of his mechanical pope. His voice curdled into fury as he invoked sacrilege against the so-called hubris of Yishebayer. The balance between titanic wills shifted with the release of those nanoscopic engines. Energy beams scoured the water, the fog was rent, and tens of thousands of alien life forms surged forward, their morale unbroken by the revelation that their quarry numbered only 2. Against such odds, Long Aotian resolved to stand. Yishebayer's summoned water beings coalesced and moved like a second tide at her command. The platform above the weeping Jundu, the banners with their hollow eyes. Every element of the scene converged toward a single inevitable collision. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath as the first volleys of mechanized and biological assault fell upon the 2 humans who had dared the Shengming Ji-Min. Yishebayer advanced with deliberate grace. She raised her right hand, and as if tracing an invisible compass, set the surrounding waters into motion. The flow condensed into concentric self-spinning disks, 81 luminous circles that materialized in an instant and shredded the vanguard of the alien horde into fragments. The slaughter was immediate and merciless. The assault did not abate. Those 81 rotating blades carved a path like a celestial plow, felling innumerable foes. Champions listed by name, including Machine the mechanist, had misjudged the disk's potency before they could deploy any stratagem. Their bodies were cleaved into pieces. Deaths so absolute they seemed to erase themselves. The unstoppable circle barrage battered down the Shengming Ji-Min and left only a single morning mist figure standing among the fallen. Where soldiers met soldiers and generals met generals, those whom Long Aotin had feared most were struck down in heartbeat by Yishebayer's uncanny might. The spectacle of power was staggering. The 81 circles had scythed through the 10,000-strong alien host like a savage harvest. Bloodied corpses and severed limbs carpeted the road that stretched toward the ruined Shengming Ji-Min. Lamentation and desolation echoed across the field. Linghao Mofang elucidated the science and peril of such assimilation. Every mortal frame emits a biofield and an energetic wavelength, fugitive signatures of flesh and consciousness. Ordinarily, these dissipate on death, but if captured and consolidated, they become a tonic of formidable potency. War machines attain their terror because they encapsulate both living auric residue and the resonance of mind into metal. Humanity's artisans had long learned to transmute another being's lifeblood into engineered advantage. The cube insisted its extraction was benign, free of contamination and sequelae, an innocuous nutrient that could be consumed without corruption. Long Aotian weighed the risk and the reward. The prospect of 5 Junjiang forged from the life essence of 10 to 20,000 enemies intoxicated him enough to suspend his fatalistic resolve. He prepared to meet the first wave even as his thoughts were stirred by the cube's pledge. The initial attackers lunged, 20 or 30 Shaolin myriad at the vanguard. Long Aotian struck with kinetic precision, deploying the flash fist technique. His gauntlet fist manifested a cascading phantom of blows, over 300 impacts within a breath. The front line of smirking mist figures dissolved into a sanguine pulp. The gauntlets reinforced by Yishebayer's transmutable nanotechnology amplified each strike 100-fold. Where a common blow might break bone, these weapons severed limbs and bodies with catastrophic efficiency. The slain emitted their biofields and wavelengths, water energy, circulating within the gauntlets drew those signatures inward and delivered them to Linghao Mofang's inner chamber. The extraction was instantaneous and appeared natural to the corpse. Their dissolution resembled a simple vanishing. Inside the cube's sanctum, the captured essences orbited and bled through the artifact's lattice each pass, making the substance clearer and more refined. With every cycle, the energies grew more translucent until they crystallized into life essence, an astonishingly pure concentration of biofield and wavelength. Long Aotian observed and believed. The essence radiated a clarity that bespoke purity and the absence of contaminating dissonance. Linghao Mofang compared gradations of life level like vintners discerning age and terroir. 1-stage beings were meager compared to those from 0. 2-stage ones, yet even such scant yield surpassed the worthless detritus found in 0-stage corpses. The cube lamented the wasted potential of lower-tier forms and calculated that the harvest from the besieging tens of thousands could feasibly be transmuted into a handful of Junjiang. Imperfect perhaps when measured against naturally ascended generals, but in the calculus of war immeasurably valuable. Thus the battlefield became a crucible of new strategy. Yishebayer's merciless artistry and Long Aotian's desperate receptiveness converged with Linghao Mofang's clinical avarice. As waves of alien life met their end beneath water-laced steel and the thundering cadence of flash fist, the cube drank and distilled. The promise of accelerated ascension hung in the air like a fragile truce between pragmatism and conscience, and the slaughter continued with grim resolve. Linghao Mofang's lament went unheard by Long Aotian. He did not notice the artifact's size. His attention was wholly absorbed by the desperate ballet of combat. In this theater of violence, he had already skirted death's edge more than once, and now had to invest every ounce of his consciousness into each strike. Around him surged another 100 or so Shaolin myriad, their grinning mist-like faces advancing with predatory intent. Each impact shuddered the surrounding water, and immense swaths of biofield and energy wavelengths were drawn into the Daiju Mofang's pocket dimension. From this siphoned vitality, a viscous aliquot of liquid life essence crystallized. The artifact's small clandestine machinations went unnoticed by the other creatures who assumed these dissolutions to be normal disintegration on the battlefield. A gargantuan Shaolin myriad, fat and obscene compared to the average of its kind, snapped off its own talons and hurled them like javelins toward Long Aotian. When its target vanished into a nulled state, the creature erupted in a mirthless guffaw that pitched the nearby water into a buzzing agitation and briefly dispelled Long Aotian's concealment. The laughter turned to rage when Long Aotian seized the opportunity. He read the creature with a flash of intent. Its life tier was higher than the average grinning mist. Linghao Mofang had mentioned 2s and 0s. This one he deduced matched the 0.2 level life form, its gene liberation rate approaching 92%, formidably potent but not invincible. Long Aotian responded with surgical precision. He targeted the skull and unleashed a sniper variation of his cannon fist. The water itself could not blunt the strike, it simply parted and recoiled. The fat Shaolin myriad collapsed with a single decisive thunder. As its biofield and wavelengths were siphoned into the Daiju Mofang, Long Aotian felt the slow accumulation of another portion of elixir-like life essence. Around the ruined gate of Shengming, Ji-Min, the battle continued to rage. Farther away, Yishebayer contended with an enemy commander, and columns of circular projectiles sliced the sea in bifurcating arcs. Sea-dwelling life forms and the guardians of the gate convulsed together in a brutal melee. Amid the turmoil, a pair of eyes locked on Long Aotian. One survivor of a previous onslaught, an alien myriad officer whose face was the portrait of grief, tore his gaze from Yishebayer and fixed it upon him. Scales like armor flared, and two wings unfurled in a single sinister motion. It cut through the water with uncanny velocity, closing 500 meters in a second, and arriving within a few heartbeats at a distance of scarcely 300 or 400 meters from Long Aotian. The creature's sorrowful, mournful eyes bore into him with such intensity that a chill crept along his skin. Before a blow was struck, he felt as if the gaze measured him for death. The alien myriad officer's voice wove sorrow like a weapon. With a plaintive cadence, it implored, or perhaps commanded the nearby forces to eliminate the Shui, Xingming, while reserving Long Aotian for a personal vengeance. Its lamentation, more keening than speech, galvanized the surrounding pack. They pivoted as one, abandoning their immediate assault on Long Aotian to surge toward the aquatic beings. The officer dismounted to the sea silt, and with tears withheld by the saline abyss vowed vengeance. His grief was performative and overwhelming, so gutting that even the hardened soldier could not help but register both the theatricality and the danger. Long Aotian found himself amused by the absurdity. Even in this crucible of peril, an involuntary smile flickered at the thought of the creature's theatrics. He kept his senses taut, wary that the alien myriad's oratory might slip into sudden violence. Words in battle seldom decide the outcome, yet the proximity and the strength of this officer suggested it could be as dangerous as Yishebayer herself. Long Aotian's perception flared to its maximum, eyes unblinking as he watched the mourning commander. Long Aotian hesitated, his mind calculating. His gene liberation rate lingered just below the threshold that might render him truly formidable. At 91%, as a 0.5 level life form, he could not assure victory by force alone. To engage in open combat here would be to lay himself unburied and unremembered beneath the sea. Yet the battlefield churned with opportunity, and the artifice of grief and gaze persisted as a threat to Yishebayer and to the fragile order of the conflict. He braced himself and watched, ready to act, as the alien myriad's lament unfurled into the next act of this violent elegiac drama. Long Aotian laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. He pointed toward the not-distant clash where Yishebayer opposed the army commander and mocked the supplicant. "Your generals are at the brink," he declared, "and by my leave you may yield. I will intercede with the lady to spare your life. Do you consent?" The alien myriad, realizing his leader might not best Yishebayer, prepared to subdue the human at their feet. He wailed of mankind's duplicity, lamenting how untrustworthy and cunning humans were, and urging surrender to avoid needless suffering. Without warning, his form blurred, and Long Aotian's senses erupted with an alarm of imminent peril. A claw swifter than thought lashed from behind for his skull. The cadence of those footsteps was uncanny. Although the two combatants stood 300 to 400 meters apart and could close that gap in less than half a second, to appear behind an opponent was another matter entirely. Had he truly moved with such impossible velocity? No wonder he had evaded Yishebayer's strike. The alien myriad pleaded once more, pointing at Long Aotian's gauntlets and lamenting that their armament grade was too low to fully channel water energy's devastation. He urged capitulation so as to spare him further harm. Long Aotian retorted coolly that she might catch him if she could. He rocketed backward, harnessing cannon-like propulsion in his feet to vault away from the assembling ranks. The enemy unfurled vast wings with a single sweep, and in an instant a wall of motion cleaved through 500 meters, stirring a cataract of oxygen bubbles. Each wing beat seemed to push the surrounding sea aside. Long Aotian, already frenzied with movement, perceived a shadow looming above a weight preparing to crush his skull. On impulse, he executed a second-speed heavy kick from his flash fist technique, striking the air above him. They struck again, and the world convulsed. The impact slammed Long Aotian back into the mud. The defensive nanobugs that shielded his right foot fractured almost entirely. Pain lanced through his entrails, and a mouthful of blood spattered the sealed visor of his mask. The self-cleaning systems expelled the life-tinged itcher. In the span of but seconds, the alien myriad's water energy dissipated. Long Aotian drew one fathomless breath and exploded from the muck hands clasped as he summoned a titanic blow from his magnetic burst technique. He hurled the concentrated magnetized punch at the enemy's nape, intent on denying any escape and delivering a lethal termination. The alien myriad lamented such folly, and with a mournful cry his wings flashed once, and his body became a streak of white light, a meteor that cleaved the air and evaded Long Aotian's full-power strike. The enemy's conversion into pure luminescence sent Long Aotian's senses into a screaming alert. The opponent had grown deadly serious and manifestly no longer wished to toy with him. Long Aotian trembled, his vision blurred, ears ringing, organs racked by pain. The alien myriad, having purged his water energy, sobbed again and extolled Long Aotian's excellence, insisting that most humans possessed far less valor. He promised the highest courtesies upon surrender and threatened that a subsequent assault would be fatal. Suddenly, a roar shattered the scene from the direction of Shengming Jimen. A Yizhong Shinming Jun-Du bellowed as his scale-like armor was carved to ruin by water energy, his defeat a spectacle of collapse and impending doom. The alien Maiwu Rin commander, sensing decisive advantage, resolved to crush Long Aotian then and there. He gathered his sinews and funneled titanic strength through his palm, determined to shatter the skull and snuff out the thread in a single crushing motion. Long Aotian's sealed facial visor creaked under pressure. He understood the intent without needing to see it. He unleashed simultaneous strikes with both hands, and engorged water energy responded obediently. The first impacts detonated against the commander's armored scales, water energy cleaving and shredding the protective plates. Still, the general's grasp did not slacken. The brute force transmitted outward like a battering ram. Linghao Mofang's voice paced the assault, dictating flows and patterns. Under its guidance, Long Aotian felt his muscle recruitment, the allocation of gathered force, and the interference of his cerebral domain synchronize with instinctive precision. At the final instant, Long Aotian's fingertip kissed the commander's brow. The impact unleashed a concussive transmutation that momentarily carved a void through the surrounding sea, producing a brief oasis of nothingness amid the waters. The commander's cranial tissue began to crystallize, spider-webbed with fissures, though it did not explode outright. The sign of fatal rupture was unmistakable. He convulsed with baffled anger and extinguished breath, confronting in his last moments the unnerving tug of a foreign power yanking at his biofield and energy wavelength. Linghao Mofang moved swiftly, extracting the crystalline remnant of his brain and siphoning the residual biofield into itself. The cube exulted noisily at the spoils, delighted by the thrill of combat and the substantial trove of Shengming Jinghua it had claimed. The life essence collected was palpably larger than the ordinary yield, a blessing that Linghao Mofang likened with raw appetite to pouring 10 liters of oil compared to 100 of volume. Here meant savor. Long Aotian stood in stunned disbelief at his own deed, marveling at the lethality he had just displayed. Linghao Mofang admitted with a faint tremor in its voice that reaching the superhuman stratum had multiplied its potency beyond reckoning. Energy fist techniques possessed a raw, enviable ferocity. The feedback through his body lingered like an exquisite aftertaste, hardening his resolve to pursue ever greater strength. Linghao Mofang warned that it had only siphoned power from a woman and was now nearly spent. It urged him to procure higher-grade war implements for further absorption if he wished to maintain such domination. Their attention was drawn to a distant battlefield, where a living black energy unfurled like sentient shadow. Dark tendrils writhed and lashed at Yishibayr, even as the water life that swirled about her retaliated with equal vigor. The black energy congealed partly into a humanoid silhouette and partly into an enormous sky-darkening cloak. The figure's features were indiscernible, as if painted in inkwash, an unnerving visage that radiated a corrupt visual malaise capable of seeding despondent energy within any who dared to gaze. The black-formed entity revealed itself as a splinter of Junhuang, one of the apex sovereigns of the Mistworld and a master of shadowed force. It reproached Yishibayr with cold mockery for the carnage her passage had brought upon myriad species and even the gifted scholars of mechanist orders and celestial academies. Junhuang's tone chilled the air. He derided the ruin she had wrought and threatened that her unchecked slaughter might swell the ranks of forbidden life zones from 21 into far greater numbers. Yishibayr answered with composure, unmoved by his taunts, asserting that her purpose triumphed over his reproach. Junhuang's mimicry of disdain quickly hardened into lethal resolve. The surrounding sea convulsed, the continent's plates beneath their feet trembled, and tectonic upheavals lifted reefs and seabed in a terrifying choreography of destruction. A tempest of currents rose, trying to sweep Long Aotian away until he buried himself in the sea silt to anchor his form. Witnessing the terrestrial and marine energies bending to a single outburst of feeling, his mind reeled at the scale of power Junhuang's fragment could wield, and at the reserves Yishibayr might have deliberately held in reserve. Yishibayr, her demeanor unperturbed, consolidated her water creatures into a singular colossus of flowing energy, its bioplasmic field stabilized into a new and majestic life form, wholly unlike the separate dragon and WYRM it had been moments before. Junhuang sneered at the revelation of her prowess and recounted the curious devotion of Li Fuxi, who had once breached his own cabal's strictures to impart arcane secrets to her. He boasted that Li Fuxi had even bargained to secure leniency for her, and that in recompense he now scoured a forbidden stellar precinct at Junhuang's behest, perhaps to his doom. With a gleeful cruelty, Junhuang unleashed a cataclysmic strike he named Infinite Gravity. His cloak collapsed into a ravenous black orb akin to a nascent void, and water mist, silt, and ruin were hurled into its maw. The seabed stones where Long Aotian lay were ripped from the earth and dragged asunder. The suction devoured everything in proximity. The horror of being drawn into an abyss should have consumed Long Aotian's thoughts, yet his mind startled itself by wandering to Li Fuxi and the curious intimacies between Yishibayr and that clandestine benefactor. At Yishe whispered invocation, Shuyao Shija, the tempest ceased, as if the world obeyed the cadence of her breath. The ravenous pull dispersed. In an instant she materialized beside Long Eotin. He leaped from the pit alarmed at the pallor on her face and the tremor in her body. The great water colossus, trailing her, bore fissures across its flank and exhaled a faint waning aura. Still Yishebayer's expression remained immaculate, her bearing composed, as if pain were merely a garment she might cast aside without perturbation. She grasped his shoulder, and with a single decisive motion stripped away his nanoweave armor, revealing the water energy cohort latent beneath, and exposing an intimacy between him and the fallen mist warrior he had slain. Long Aotian felt for a flicker of a moment the seductive thought of betraying his companion, and while Yishebayer was wounded colluding with Linghao Mofang to dispatch her once and for all. The notion was so extravagant that he almost laughed at his own audacity. His ego swelled like a fragile balloon. To imagine that after slaying a being whose Jian Jifangle barely reached 100%, he could entertain such grandiose schemes was patently ridiculous. He chastised himself inwardly at the very thought of becoming a laughingstock. Yishebayer placed a slender jade-like finger upon Long Aotian's chest and paused in quiet study. Every new discovery about him compounded her astonishment more than the revelations of several preceding years had combined. Why does water energy resonate with him so intimately? She withdrew her hand, and with a single precise motion, traced a line along his form. Water energy flowed over him, coalescing into a filigreed armor of shimmering force that clothed his body like an exhaled tide. For an instant she frowned at a subtle anomaly concerning a third limb, a nuance so slight that Long Aotian failed to notice it altogether. He hastened to explain, eager to seize the turn of events. My lady, this water energy battle garment is far more comfortable than any nanosuit I have worn. I owe you my thanks. As for those sorrow-faced fog legionnaires, they were drawn by the clash between you and Junhuang's avatar. I exploited the distraction to strike them down with concentrated water energy barges. She gripped his solid shoulder, and with the command of water obeying water propelled them along the path they had come. The two of them rode a newly formed current, a nascent oceanic stream that bore them at a velocity approaching the limits of sensation. Dragged along, Long Aotian felt the strain in his left shoulder as the motion bruised his flesh. Yishebayer's wounds were grievous, her control over her strength had become erratic. Her complexion had drained to pallor, and the corners of her mouth were touched with red in effort to repress bleeding. Behind her loomed a colossal water energy titan, its surface webbed with ever-tightening fissures. Suddenly, a sinister laughter cut through the rush of the current. An avatar of dark energy elongated its right arm into a taut, glittering filament and followed the newly formed stream. In the span of a heartbeat, the line had overtaken them, its gravitational pull systematically unraveling the current's integrity. Had it not been intercepted, the flow would have collapsed and carried them both into ruin. Her eyes turned a steely azure as she murmured, "Go." The water titan, as if moved by some nobler impulse, hurled itself at the line and seized it. The filament's gravity ate into the titan's form, ravaging its cohesion. Then, with a roar that even Long Aotian had not thought possible from such a construct, the water giant detonated. Shards of dense water energy burst outward like explosive blossoms, bombarding the surrounding void and rendering the dark filament's gravitational lock into chaotic confusion. The tether that had fixed its aim upon Yishebayer dissolved. At that instant, Yishebayer crushed a small activation node in the hollow of her palm. A vibrating field unfurled, a transfer matrix that enveloped them. Particles unmade themselves, the identity thinned into a cold, solitary absence that left Long Aotian with an uncanny loneliness in his thoughtscape. He had endured particle transfer before, but no rematerialization had ever failed to press a hollow ache within him. When the luminous motes faded and the transfer concluded, life reconstituted itself anew at the threshold of a reception bay. Nearby, the dark energy avatar whose arm had been a filament regrew its form, and its consuming blackness reconstituted into a cloak that blotted the skies. A moment later, Jundu, who had nearly been slain by Yishebayer, convulsed and expelled something from his abdomen. From within him, one by one, came spewed figures, survivors who had been buried and hidden within his body as grim refuges. Among them strode the engineer, Maktangna, brandishing gratitude and terror in equal measure. He and the others declared their thanks to Junhuang, for had they not hid within Jundu and presented a false corpus to die, their fate likely would have been sealing by Yishebayer's judgment. Maktangna, countenanced by a slender, beguiling woman known by reputation as Qianmian Sheon Kong Onbo, bowed with calculated reverence. "We know we cannot have fooled Yishebayer for long," he said. "Therefore we entreat your majesty to strike her down while she is weakened." The dark avatar laughed and answered with cold amusement. To pursue Yishebayer now, he said, would be to incur the wrath of Li Fuxi and to fracture the machinations of the sect's funders. One doomed life was not worth jeopardizing grander designs. He mocked the smallness of their hopes and suggested that those who desired Yishebayer's death were many in the life center. Had she already been crippled by his infinite gravity, what chance did she truly retain? Escaping his grasp, he continued, would be only a step toward other ambushes laid by her comrades. Make Tangna, bereft of his mechanical cache, converted his legs into thrusting jets and surged forward without delay. The others followed, each deploying their arts and talents in pursuit. On a concealed platform elsewhere, Long Aotin and Yishebayer's particle fields reconsolidated. Small fish and crustaceans that had been minding the reef scattered in frantic arcs at their sudden arrival. The coral around them gleamed with botanical fluorescence, and phosphorescent fish lanterns danced among waving fronds. The scene was unexpectedly serene in its beauty. Yishebayer chose a sheltered alcove where the colors of the reef wove a private tapestry. She took a breath as one who had stepped out from a storm. I must rest, she admitted in a voice that had cavernous fatigue. Zhenhuang's infinite gravity was devastating. My bioplasmic field is compromised, my energy wavelengths are turbulent. Break free from his gravity, and it has exhausted me entirely. Though she spoke with calm clarity, the strain in her tone betrayed the severity of her wounds. A single avatar of Dominion-level strength had humbled her, yet the defeat had not been without value. The encounter had broadened her comprehension of the Dominion rank, and with that new understanding the path to ascendancy seemed less veiled than before. As her voice softened, the water energy gathered about Yishebayer and congealed into a crystalline orb within which small water life forms flickered and darted, vestiges of the mist world's remaining fauna. Long Aotian found himself tempted to experiment with the Jixi Migi at once to see what configurations might be possible, yet prudence prevailed. If Yishebayer awoke to any alteration, he could scarcely explain what would follow. Discovery could mean instant death. He resolved to wait until they were apart before indulging his curiosity, and kept vigil beside her for 2 uneventful hours, believing the interval would pass without incident. Without awaiting further parley, Long Aotian unleashed a teeming cloud of mechanical nanites. They sprang into a hive-like lattice, coalescing into an impenetrable shell that cocooned him and Yishebayer. The defense was both swift and intimate, a testament to their prior enmity and to Long Aotian's determination not to be taken unawares. Xiao Zitaizi's visage darkened with fury at such defiance. He declared Long Aotian had squandered his final boon, and with a gesture transmuted earth and sand into a torrential slurry. Mud and slurry roared forth like an unleashed avalanche, reshaping the seascape into a churning mire. The assault struck with concussive force, battering the nanite bastion as if someone hurled a mountain against a single nut. The reverberations rang in Long Aotian's bones, and though the mechanical swarm suffered widespread rupture, they held their form long enough to stave off immediate catastrophe. Xiao Zitai's laughter rang like a blade. The roaring dunes he had summoned abruptly ceased their furious assault. The sand waves, no longer battering, congealed into a cement-like membrane that smothered the lattice of mechanical nanoarms, sealing the entire construct in an airtight, implacable cocoon. The memory of his duel with a superhuman crystallized the explanation. The adversary needed not brute strength. With nothing more than a biological force field and calibrated energy wavelengths, he could consume the signal reserves embedded in war machines, rendering them helpless. It was precise, clinical, and devastatingly effective. The cube's intervention was no empty boast. Its presence granted Long Aotian a reserve of auxiliary brain domain force, a vital bolster against Xiao Zitai's scheming. Perhaps to avoid collateral harm to Yishebayer, or due to some strategic prudence, Xiao Zitai had eschewed a brute force sandstorm and instead adopted a more circuitous stratagem, enough to stall but not to annihilate. Long Aotian inquired whether Linghao Mofang's prolonged communion might draw the enemy's notice. The cube replied that the opponent's perceptive sensitivity was weak, though it could not vouch for Yishebayer, whose acuity remained unknown and required testing. The disparity was decisive, Linghao Mofang argued. Deployed en masse and cleverly directed, such forces could confound and outmaneuver the opposing combatant. Long Aotian seized the argument and plunged his own limited reserves of personal energy into fabrication. Although not a superhuman in the absolute sense, his store of mutable nanoweaponry and water energy was abundant enough to drive relentless production. Within seconds, one storage bay filled, and in a heartbeat a second followed. Fill 2 bays and release them in one sweep. Linghao Mofang urged, delighting in the cunning. 10 seconds later, the sea became a living tempest. A tidal bloom of mechanical cannon fish, sharks, and octopi tore from the Jixi Migi. They paired with the nanoworm networks, their formations tracking along the pressurized sandwaters toward Xiao Zitaizi. And then there were the mechanical octopi seeded with the essence of the 746 Zhangjiu from Valikan 746. Those entities bore a fearsome reputation as self-destructive predators. Once sated, they fragmented and detonated. The spawned progeny retained elements of their progenitor's physiology. The 746 Zhangjiu's voracity for sandwater ensured it gorged until its body swelled with lethal potential. Ling Hao Mofang laughed softly at the display. When one such octopus burst free from the slurry, its contentment drove it to split and combust. Xiao Zitezi hastened to increase the distance from the rupture using space to buy precious reaction time. Biological self-detonation, he realized with mounting unease, was a legitimate and unpredictable tactic. A life form's native energies, when properly harnessed, equaled or exceeded scientific high explosives in their concussive potential. Ling Hao Mofang had lived long enough to catalog innumerable organisms and their peculiar strengths, and it had preserved them within the Jixi Migi so that Long Aotian might exploit their advantages. Having provoked the chaos, Long Aotian now called his mechanical legion back into the cabinet, fabricating the illusion of scarcity to deceive his adversary. A newcomer approached with an imperious gaze. For safety, Long Aotian cracked open only a narrow slit to observe. The stranger likewise surveyed him, but when he noticed Yishebayer enveloped in dense aquatic energy, a subtle alteration crossed his features. Ling Hao Mofang issued a soft warning into Long Aotian's mind. It explained that each superhuman's manifested energy bears both likenesses and distinctions. Some share methods, while others interpret their gifts in singular ways. This particular adversary favored fortifying the flesh rather than radiating power outward. His strikes were compact and explosive. If Long Aotian needed proof, he should recall the mechanics of energy combat. Yisong frowned but stayed polite. He requested access to question Yishebayer. Long Aotian refused with equal firmness, citing the recent conflict between Xiao Zitezi and Yishebayer and his consequent mistrust. He promised to report the matter faithfully to the lady and insisted Yisong return. Yisong scoffed at the Jixi Migi's defenses and declared that its array, even supplemented by other war machines, would not deter him. He professed goodwill toward Yishebayer while warning that he intended to clarify a grave matter and would remove Xiao Zitezi afterward, ensuring she would no longer be troubled. Yisong amplified his voice with energy, sending resonant waves outward that trembled across the sea and alarmed nearby fish. He taunted Li Fuxi, accusing him of covertly inciting the Shuyu Xing incident and colluding with Shengming Zongzin and the Life Forbidden Zone. For a time, the only response was silence, and Yisong's patience frayed. He threatened that if Li Fuxi did not show himself, he would strike with full force, and that Yishebayer would be harmed. Li Fuxi mocked Yisong's reproach, offering a mordant reproof about honor, and with chilling levity proposing to use Yisong's left third rib as a token of regained dignity. The exchange escalated into taunts about peculiar appetites and institutional rivalries. Yisong's composure snapped, crimson beams erupted from his eyes, and tore toward Li Fuxi's head. Yisong's eyes flared with an uncanny crimson radiance, not a mere heat beam, but a manifest energy torrent born of superhuman will. The torrent's potency was such that the crushing pressure of the deep ocean could not abate it. Thick as a basin, each beam rivaled the main cannon of a near-orbit warship in destructive intent. Li Fuxi, the foremost Huizi, regarded the crimson shafts with an expression of contempt. Before he so much as moved, the waters surrounding him fissured into fragmented panes, each like a shattered mirror. The once linear beams bent askew as they pierced the broken sea. In a single fluid motion, Li Fuxi seized the distorted energy. The captured light blossomed with spiderwebbed cracks beneath his grip. Ling Hao Mofang cried out in astonishment that the phenomenon was Suli Ningliang, fragmentation energy. The held beam continued to fracture, its latent terror dissolving amid the splintering. Yisong confident laughed triumphantly and bathed himself in the same red glow. He invoked his technique Hong Ing Duoming Sha, and the dissipating shards were impregnated with tiny red sigils, as if being marked. At a single instant, every shard bore a crimson mark. Yisong conjured a colossal energy discharge that vanished mere meters before him, only to erupt from the marked fragments scattered throughout the water. Explosions detonated among the countless shards around Li Fuxi, carving gouges into the seabed and expelling water in a violent radial vacuum that swept a 500-meter radius. The world trembled beneath the outpouring of force. Yet the engine of devastation suddenly unraveled. The vacuum collapsed as if the scene were a pane of glass. The shards themselves fractured and dispersed, their energies dissipating into nothing. Yisong recoiled in disbelief. Li Fuxi remarked dryly that Yisong's repeated infusions numbered only 17 or 18, barely his limit, whereas masters at the Life Center could push thousands of times. Satisfied with the lesson, Li Fuxi announced he would claim Yisong's third rib and deposit an item within the defeated man's body. As Yisong seized the moment to flee, with Xiao Zitezi, Li Fuxi's hand flicked and ruptured the fractured space. Cracks surged and enveloped them. Two fragments manifested nearby, each containing a bloodied rib. Li Fuxi plucked a rib from its shard, thrust it into his mouth, and chewed with an expression of perverse relish. Only then did he turn his attention toward Yishebayer's direction and address Long Aotian. The water's energy field receded, and Yishebayer stepped forward. Linghao Mofang, sensing her imminent awakening, cautioned Long Aotian privately against accepting Li Fuxi's largesse, lest the lady notice, and their prior endeavors be for naught. The moment brimmed with restrained tension as allegiances and propriety held sway over temptation. When Yishebayer drew close, her gaze was composed entirely of admiration. For the first time, Long Aotian perceived the faint curl of a smile upon her countenance. It was a discovery that unsettled him. He had never before seen her smile. Now, for reasons he could not yet name, she smiled at him. Admirable, she said, her voice warm with approval. You have comported yourself well. If you aspire to become a top-tier powerhouse, you must advance without hesitation and face challenges head-on. The Deciphered is sorely in need of progeny of your caliber. They would not spurn a candidate of such virtue. Had their temperament been half as resolute as yours, the Deciphered would not have fallen to its present state. Startled, Long Aotian hastened to retract the mechanical nanobots and prepared to return the Jixi Migi he had in his possession. There were implications in her words he could not answer aloud. A proximity to a sovereign likeness of a tiger demanded circumspection. Moreover, the Jixi Migi had not been explicitly granted to him. He refused to appear avaricious by withholding what was not his to keep. Such behavior would be egregiously ill-received by those above. It would be tantamount to presuming reward for service. Originally I had other plans for this Jixi Migi, she admitted. Yet your conduct has satisfied me. Consider it your boon. With this war implement you may accelerate your growth. As Long Aotian had surmised, she bestowed the mechanical cabinet upon him. At a stage where one's gene liberation had reached a ceiling of 100, personal advancement became excruciatingly arduous and terribly dependent on external augmentation. Possession of a war-grade device could tilt the balance from ruin to opportunity. The gulf between having and not having such aid was as wide as sky and earth. The memory of the Shuyu Xing mission still testified to that truth. Now equipped with a D-class peak-grade war engine, Long Aotian found himself poised to challenge even the likes of Qi Jishou Dia on roughly equal terms. Before he could fully digest the gift, Yihuizi Li Fuxi's voice tempered the air. His reproach was laced with concern rather than command. How could you dare assault Shengmingji men? The Shengmingji men is a strategic asset of Junhuang, shattering, and Junhuang will assuredly manifest. You know the stature of Junhuang. Your own Shengming Zongzin's director treats him with no small measure of deference, yet you risk provoking him. If your calculation errs, what will you do if what descends is not Junhuang himself, but a dark energy doppelganger? Have you pondered that possibility? The tone had none of the earlier imperiousness. It was the warm, solicitous cadence of a charming man, tending his beloved, an echo of an earthly archetype Long Aotian could not ignore. Long Aotian arched a brow at the parting barb. Even as he played the peripheral role in this interplay, Li Fuxi's departure managed to needle him one last time. Yishebayer interjected with a teacher's sternness. Courage is noble, but folly is its counterfeit. Without strength, the most trenchant defiance is nothing but impotent barking. To provoke a being like him and be slain, such conduct is foolishness, not bravery. Only when you are a true potentate will your words carry weight. Long Aotian bowed and replied yes, miss. Yishebayer explained that shard energy is a peculiar manifestation of spatial power, notoriously capricious and exceedingly difficult to extract intact. Such an operation required someone versed in the subtleties of spatial forces, experts who within Shengming Zongzin invariably occupied the upper echelons. With a graceful gesture, she summoned a Shu Shengming which glided toward them like a living vessel and suggested they proceed to the nearest temporary transit point to board a transport ship. As Long Aotian approached Renyi Shu, the environs felt strictly militarized. Armed emplacements and sentry posts lined the avenues, imparting the sensation of entering a martial preserve. A voice barked a warning. Startled, he turned to see a patrolwoman clad in black armor, her cropped brown hair framing a striking face. He saluted and declared that he had completed a task and sought to submit materials for nomination. The woman, skeptical, demanded to inspect his evidence. The automated turrets swiveled and surveillance arrays focused as the encounter escalated into formal scrutiny. The black-armored officer returned the proofs and instructed him to follow without idle gazing. Escorted through overlapping zones of defense, gun emplacements, defensive lines, and several patrol formations, Long Aotian was led into a capacious hall within Renyi Shu. Inside, clusters of people assembled, among them several distinguished professors of the first rank. In this milieu, graduate candidates enjoyed access and discourse denied to ordinary students. The latter could only pose questions during public lectures and otherwise had to rely on innate talent to glean knowledge. A ripple passed through the crowd as a figure in black entered. Students bowed in unison and greeted her with reverence. Long Aotan observed with a private satisfaction as she received their homage with a measured nod and advanced to where several Tepen Yuji Jiaosho were gathered. She exchanged a few hushed words with them, and conversation shifted like a wind toward him. The professors asked whether a new Swezi had truly slain an alien Maiwa Rinjunjiang. They wanted the task materials at once. Long Aotan felt the scrutiny upon him. Astonishment, envy, incredulity. Each gaze sharpening his visibility until he shone like a solitary star under myriad eyes. He knew which truths to reveal and which to shroud. To confess and escape from the grasp of the Junhuang might summon investigators from the Shengming Zongzhen and set in motion an invasive scene reconstruction and hypnotic interrogation. With deliberate calm, he produced from his case the Yaogu and the Nao Jing, laying them upon the counter as evidence. The professors handled the relics with clinical curiosity, lifting the blood-slick bone and testing it from every angle. The Nao Jing gleamed with an alien luster. They confirmed the pair belonged to the same organism and marveled at the Junjiang's formidable constitution. An ideal substrate for a Zhanjing binky, they lamented, had the entire cadaver been retrieved, the likelihood of successful manufacture would have been far greater. Some professors doubted that one young Swezi could have felled such a formidable opponent unaided, but the authenticity of the artifacts was indisputable. Their task protocol required only the physical proof of the Junjiang's material. The Tepen Yuji Jiaosho completed their verification and declared the examination closed. A small box bearing a unique barcode was issued along with a certificate. The barcode would be entered into his real-time communicator and instructions would follow within roughly 3 days. They also handed him a vial of precious elixir as further recompense for slaying a Junjiang. Historical fragments documented 3 vast incursions of Shinkong Chongzu into the spiral arms. Like locusts, they stripped systems bare, and only through catastrophic sacrifice did the galaxy's civilizations drive them back. No one could predict when the 4th wave would descend, so every species spared no effort to root out and annihilate any detected swarms. Missions that involved Shinkong Chongzu were deemed supremely hazardous. The battlefields were grotesque theaters of predation where the enemy fought while tearing apart their victims. Imagine the psychological torment of watching a comrade's skull crushed to a pulp and an eyeball expelled from its socket. Such scenes shattered resolve. Ling Hao Mofang, giddy with excitement, declared that if the mission did involve Shinkong Chongzu, it would indeed be preferable. Their victims yielded pure, more concentrated Shengming Jinghua. Long Aotian recoiled at the thought. He did not wish to be their dinner. He reminded Ling Hao of the countless prodigies who had fallen in such operations. Some campaigns had ended in total annihilation. Ling Hao snorted and mentioned a recent engagement in which 500,000 participants had been lost to complete rout. Long Aotian sat on the couch staring at the vial of essence on the table. At last he asked Ling Hao for a portion. Ling Hao grinned and produced several translucent rock sugar-like shards of Shengming Jinghua. Long Aotian tossed one into his mouth. It tasted exquisitely sweet at first, then warmth unfurled through his viscera. The current spread into every organ, his cells quickened the lattice of neural fibers, sang with exhilaration. He staggered beneath a wave of ecstatic vitality, and as his body assimilated the infusion, a sublime clarity suffused his mind. Ling Hao Mofang crowed that Shengming Jinghua was hard currency, even among second-tier life forms, far superior to the pathetic essence liquid on Long Aotian's desk. Yet even that inferior elixir was coveted within the Shengming Zongzhen. He urged Long Aotian not to hesitate, and to make the most of the sensation by training immediately. After careful introspection, he realized his gene liberation rate had reached 100%. Cellular division proceeded with unprecedented precision, the theoretical ideal. Yet he perceived only a modest increment in raw power, scarcely the leap he had envisioned. Ling Hao laughed softly and explained that such rapid bodily advancement required time for the neural fiber network to retune. The organs and tissues elevated their functions in sequence. Strength would not be granted all at once. Once the network settled, an intense hunger would follow. He reflected with a critic's eye upon the present strength of their forces. Killing a single Alian Maiwu Ren general had yielded only a single vial of essence, a pitiful return. Was technology in decline, unable to produce more potent substances? Yet the young talents he observed displayed formidable promise. Placed in his own era, they would have been deemed prodigies. Still, the future remained uncertain, and the specter of Shinkong Chongzu gatherings haunted his thoughts. Ling Hao Mofang sometimes chattered ceaselessly within Long Aotian's consciousness, at other times falling so utterly silent that its presence went unnoticed. Long Aotian reflected that the Shengming Zongzhen was a top-tier organ. Perhaps they hesitated to lavish resources on a Swezi whose status as a Yanjiasheng remained unconfirmed. It would be wasteful if one perished after being invested in. How long have I been training? He asked. A day and a half came the reply. He nodded, aware there was still time. He resolved to absorb as much Shengming Jinghua as possible to elevate his life tier and thereby amplify his strength. Such power would not only hasten his promotion but also secure his safety during missions and ensure that when confronting figures like Dao Cung, his identity would not render him inferior. Ling Hao Mofang produced a life force crystal the size of a large pear. Eat it said. Take it without restraint. Shengming Jinghua was immaculate sustenance, its purity enhanced when distilled by higher beings. As Long Aotian, relentless in his regimen, assaulted his limits to accumulate power, he consumed the essence and felt his potential coil tighter within him. Far away, the core tier of the Shengming Zongzin convulsed with agitation. I have disgraced the Shaoxi family, shouted Shaoxi Taizi, kneeling, his face ashen and lips speckled with blood. He accused Isabel of masterful water energy techniques, which had snatched away his left third rib and left fragmentary energies lodged in his body. Bitter fury laced his words as he insinuated an illicit liaison between Isabel and Li Fuxi, suggesting collusion and treachery. He accused Isabel of repeatedly harming both him and Yisong. Shaoxi Jinxiang, a silver-maned elder clad in black battle armor, listened with narrowed eyes. His presence exuded authority, strands of silver, hair floated like sentient filaments, each quivering with restrained power. As an elite professor, his rank transcended ordinary distinguished lecturers, his sway in both martial and institutional matters absolute. He demanded explanation and marveled that on paper Isabel and Yisong shared similar gene liberation phases. How then could Isabel have dealt such a grievous blow? More puzzling still was the purity of the fragmentary energy left behind within Shaoxi Taizi and Yisong. Such refined shards should not have been injected casually. Shaoxi Taizi confessed that Li Fuxi had ambushed them. Li Fuxi, having appeared in the aquatic sector and shadowing Isabel, had somehow exploited an opportunity to wound them. Shaoxi Taizi insisted that Isabel had repeatedly courted Li Fuxi and sought to overturn the Shengming Zongzin's order. He advised that the lodged fragment energies be purged at once lest they corrupt the victim's gene chains. For matters of spatial power, one elder within the institution stood second to none. They would consult him. The security division of the Shengming Zongzin wielded extraordinary authority. Life and death were often decided within its walls. Its director was a grim arbiter with both overwhelming combat prowess and transcendent life-tier mastery. Outside, the building had been fashioned from a refitted warship, its facades black and menacing. Gun emplacements and squadrons bristled. A garrison of 1 million elite troops, the Xian Junduan, maintained permanent vigil. Each soldier was a boundary-breaking fighter at 100% gene liberation, and the command cadre exceeded that, hovering at 101%. Their aura was predatory, far from mere mercenary corps. Before they ascended the honors steps, Zheng Xiong bade his son to compose himself. The staircase comprised 365 steps, each wrapped in a gravity field designed to impose hardship upon ascent. Ritual hardship was the lesson. Even Zheng Xiong could have bypassed the ordeal by instantaneous transit, but such an act within the security division would be deemed a grievous breach of propriety. There, even an elite professor might be disciplined for such disrespect. They readied themselves to climb.